Good morning. We are live on Facebook. Everybody stand by, please. We're getting ready to begin. Thank you very much for joining us. We will begin in just a moment here. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. A couple logistical things to get us started. If you have questions during the course of the webinars today, you may use the Q&A function to submit your question, and then we will be able to respond to it. So put your questions in the Q&A function, and the moderators will be able to answer them for you. Thank you very much once again for joining us. Let's welcome Paul D. from the Coalition, who will be introducing our moderators for today. Paul is a member of the steering committee of the Coalition. Residing in Germany, he's the managing director of Steadway, an international project and cost management consultancy based in Berlin. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Kevin. Distinguished panelists and participants, on behalf of the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiations, I want to thank you for accepting our invitation and call to join this very important forum. The Coalition is happy to host this event as part of our continuous engagement to bring an end to the ongoing conflict in Cameroon through justice and durable peace. Today's forum brings together critical stakeholders within the international community to discuss and build on the United States Senate Resolution 684, which I think we are all aware of. We believe this discussion will set the tone for other parliaments and governments to engage. To kickstart this event, let me introduce the moderations of this forum. I'll start with Henrietta. Henrietta is a steering committee member of the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiations. In his day job, he serves as executive director of the United States International Center for Electoral Support, an international organization that provides election assistance services to different countries across the globe. Henry has over a decade of experience working and consulting for different international and intergovernmental organizations, including the United Nations, the African Union, the United Nations Development Program, the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, as well as the Carter Center. He has worked in more than 12 countries in Africa and the Middle East. Henry is one of the contributors of the Election Data Science Lab hosted by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and a contributor to the Electoral Violence Prediction Market, an initiative supported by the United States Department's Bureau for Conflict Stabilization Operations to track election violence across the globe. He holds a graduate certificate in election administration from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, University of Minnesota, a Master of Arts in Electoral Policy and Administration from the School of Advanced Studies, Pisa in Italy, and a Master of Arts in Democracy and Governance from Georgetown University of the United States of America. Henry has equally attended courses on conflict analysis, negotiations, and conflict management, as well as peacekeeping and international conflict resolution at the United Institute of Peace. Our second moderator for today will be Judith Nwana. Judith is one of the co-chairs of the steering committee of the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiations. She became involved in advocacy when she joined the fight for Bring Back Our Internet during the internet shutdowns in Cameroon. She has worked with international organizations such as Access Now and Internet Sans Frontières in highlighting the ills of internet shutdowns. She is a strong advocate for the plight of Southern Cameroonians, activists who have been arrested and jailed for hundreds of days after unfair military trials. She is equally a steering committee member of the Cameroonian Humanitarian Relief Initiative, helping thousands of refugees in Nigeria and the ITPs and the political prisoners in Cameroon. She believes strongly in the need to help bring a peaceful, mediated, and negotiative end to the ongoing conflict. In her day job, Judith leads the Global Telecoms Link delivery, contracts and vendor management at the World Bank Group, and is the vice chair of the organization's African Society. She holds an MBA from London Business School, a Bachelor in Honors in Civil Engineering from Enugu State University, Nigeria, and a Master of Science in Civil and Structural Engineering from the University of Sheffield in the UK. She is an MCIPS member of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. Ladies and gentlemen, your moderators, Judith and Henry. Judith and Henry, you have the floor.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for that excellent introduction, and welcome everybody. On behalf of the coalition, before I start, I would like us to take a minute of silence. As we know, tomorrow marks a year since the Ngabu massacre. February 14th, 2020 was a dark day for us, when the Cameroon government forces and armed ethnic Fulani killed at least 21 civilians, including 13 children and 1 pregnant woman. Join me to observe a minute of silence for those victims. Thank you for joining us to remember the Ngabu victims. It is my pleasure to welcome Congresswoman Karen Bass. Congresswoman Karen Bass, let me take this opportunity on behalf of the coalition to congratulate you for your re-election as chair of the Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, and Global Human Rights. Congresswoman Bass was re-elected to her 6th term, representing the 37th Congressional District in November 2020. She also serves on the House Judiciary Committee on Crime and Terrorism, where she's active in working to craft sound criminal justice reform policies. She served as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus in 2019 and 2020. Representative Bass has served on the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Africa, Global Health, Global Human Rights, and international organizations for as long as she served in the Congress. As chair of the subcommittee, she has acted to build coalitions and support economic growth and partnerships with the African continent, with a goal to transform how the United States engages with African nations and to promote human rights and the many opportunities to expand trade and economic growth between America and the African nations. Her engagement in protecting human rights took her to Cameroon in 2019 to meet with Cameroon government officials amidst the ongoing conflict between Cameroon government forces and armed groups from the English-speaking regions. Upon her return to Washington, D.C., she sponsored House Resolution 358, calling on the government of Cameroon and the armed groups to respect the human rights of all citizens, to end all violence, and to pursue a broad-based dialogue without preconditions to resolve the conflict in the Northwest and Southwest regions. Congresswoman Bass has been tirelessly engaged in stopping the deportation of asylum seekers who fled the civil war in Cameroon, getting involved as recent as early this month. We thank you, Congresswoman, for your dedication to supporting human rights. Please allow me and allow us to listen to Congresswoman Bass with pleasure.
Hello, everyone. Let me thank the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiations for inviting me to say a few words on the ongoing situation in Cameroon. I'm sorry I couldn't be a part of the live discussion, but I'm sure you all will have a few fruitful dialogue on the next steps to helping solve the crisis in the Northwest and Southwest regions of Cameroon. The work from the Coalition and its partner does not go unnoticed, and your organization helps inform Congress of what's happening on the ground. I hope you all continue to help educate Cameroonians in helping to resolve the conflict. I hope that you engage the Cameroonian government, brief the international community on the existing conflict, and help give solutions to try and end the conflict. Recently, President Biden sent a message to the African Union during the AU summit. I'm told by the Cameroonian diaspora that the message was well received and reached millions of Cameroonians. The United States wants the continent to know that we are back and ready to engage in a true strategic partnership based on mutual gain. And I believe President Biden's message of hope, reassurance, and respect and appreciation for Africa was on full display. I want to personally say that I am hopeful now that U.S. policy toward Africa writ large will move toward a trade and investment partnership and away from the notion of charity. I believe the Biden-Harris administration understands how the world works and knows the importance of partnerships. And I know that you know over the last few years you have been able to count on the House of Representatives and the Senate to make sure that Cameroon was a central concern to us. And so in that regard, I have issued statements urging the government of Cameroon and the separatist leaders to help stop crimes against civilians and for the government to investigate all transgressions thoroughly and bring perpetrators to justice. Before COVID, I had the opportunity to visit Cameroon for a brief period, and I do hope to return as soon as we are able to travel again. I met with Maurice Kamto to discuss good governance, human rights, and violence taking place in the Anglophone Northwest and Southwest regions of Cameroon. I called on armed separatists to stop kidnapping local and parliamentary candidates and let Cameroonians exercise their civic duties. I also introduced a resolution calling on the government of Cameroon and all armed groups to respect the human rights of all citizens, to end the violence, and to pursue a broad-based negotiated dialogue without preconditions to resolve the conflict in the Northwest and Southwest regions. So when you couple this with a humanitarian crisis and civil war characterized by displacement, war crimes, and shortages of water, even those who want to return home can't. The global COVID-19 pandemic has only served to compound these issues, taking an additional toll on public health and the economy. So that's why I co-sponsored a letter to the Biden administration and Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas calling on them to protect Cameroonians in the United States from deportation back to unsafe conditions by issuing an immediate 18-month designation of either TPS, temporary protected status, or deferred enforced departure. I met with the diaspora both in Washington, D.C. and in my home state of California. In fact, we took a trip with several members of Congress, of the Congressional Black Caucus, and Juan Vargas from the border to Tijuana, Mexico. We went across into Mexico and we specifically met with Cameroonians that were in Tijuana. The fact that people traveled from Ecuador all the way to Mexico is unbelievable. So we met with the diaspora, and in fact today there is a press conference because we know that there are 60 Cameroonians that are facing deportation right now, and we're calling on the administration to cease the deportations. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak briefly, and rest assured that I am monitoring Cameroon closely, and I will look forward to hearing your suggestions on how the U.S. can continue to help support the end to the Northwest and Southwest conflict, and how we can strengthen our vital economic security and bilateral partnerships. Thank you very much, and I hope that you have a very positive and helpful event today.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, for your opening remarks. We look forward to continuing our engagement with your office and yourself to ensure a negotiated peace agreement is reached through multilateral international mediation. Ladies and gentlemen, the stage has been set for our three-panel discussions. The first panel is a discussion to get an overview of the U.S. Senate Resolution 684 and the potential next steps. This resolution was conceived and sponsored by Senator Rich, of course, with very firm support from Senator Cardin and other co-sponsors. But Judith and myself, and I would guess many of our participants, know that senior level congressional staffers are critical in drafting a resolution, reviewing the language, and ensuring that it gets co-sponsors and eventually passed on the floor. In this discussion, we are joined by our very good friend John Tomaszewski, popularly known as JT. Judith.
John, as Henry said, simply known as JT, currently serves as a lead professional staff member on the Foreign Relations Committee in the US Senate, where his portfolio focuses on sub-Saharan Africa. Previously, JT, who recently served as the International Republican Institute's Regional Director for Africa, which included overseeing the Institute's democracy and governance projects in more than 18 countries across the subcontinent. We are so happy to have you here with us today. JT was IRR's Nairobi-based country director from 2012 to 2015, leading projects in Kenya, South Sudan, and the wider East African region. He started with IRR assisting with the management of the Institute's political party, strengthening programs in South Sudan, before eventually transferring to do the same in Egypt. Before joining IRI, JT worked for the crisis and litigation practice at Levick Strategic Communications in Washington, D.C. From 2004 to 2008, he managed communications for 2 members of the US Congress. JT, on behalf of the coalition, thanks for accepting to join us for this important discussion. Henry and I had a lengthy discussion with you back in March 2020 in your office about the need for a focused resolution on the armed conflict. The Foreign Relations Committee has since then been engaged in seeing how the Senate can play a role to facilitate an end to the ongoing conflict. What motivated the committee to draft and pass such a focused resolution? JT.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Henry. And thanks all of you for putting this event together. I think it's a great way of bringing the different stakeholders working in the United States, working internationally, working among the Cameroonian diaspora to really try and focus and get some movement on these issues. I work for ranking member Jim Risch, who most recently was the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee until Congress changed over. And I work on sub-Saharan Africa policy for ranking member Risch. And, you know, I do remember the meeting that we had. It was just as COVID, we were all sort of going into our quarantines, and it was probably one of the last meetings I held in person prior to all of that's been going on. So yeah, I mean, you know, as you know, these discussions have been going on for quite some time. And certainly we were really interested in working with the coalition for dialogue and negotiations, which is doing really important work to elevate the crisis in Cameroon. Just really quickly, I'm excited to see how members of other legislatures in France, Germany, the Gambia, Kenya, South Africa will be able to really look at these types of efforts in legislatures and also continue that sort of global campaign to really bring purpose and direction to their respective governments on this issue. This is an opportunity for you to use that other branch of government to really help shape policy. You know, I think it's great to see Representative Karen Bass. She and I, you know, we've served on election observations together in Zimbabwe and elsewhere. We've done a number of things together. So it's great to see her. And I would say that, you know, HRS 358, which she got out of the House of Representatives, was really you know, sort of a good motivational kick for many of us on this side to think that we could use some of that momentum to really push. You know, Senator Cardin had an earlier resolution on Cameroon that kind of languished. And, you know, as these resolutions are, you know, you introduce them and then a lot of things happen in a country, and then, you know, then you've got to go up and update them. And, you know, we decided to team up together. So it's really been a strong bipartisan, you know, effort together to really bring these issues forward, and then to really craft language in such a way that we would be successful in getting it to pass out of the Senate. And, you know, I think it's important whenever you look at these types of things, the bipartisan nature of it, particularly on the Senate side, where you had a number of Republicans who signed on. You know, you've seen sort of, again, a clamoring of efforts on both sides of the aisle, but also within two houses. And so the message to Cameroonians should be, we're listening, we're working, we're pushing these issues. Of course, we have our lanes that we've got to work in, but we can also use our oversight function in the Senate and the House to really engage the State Department, engage other agencies in the U.S. government, engage the new administration, engage the UN, to really push some of the key provisions within this resolution. You know, it's important to note that as nominees come through under the new Biden administration, whether it be Secretary of State Blinken or nominee for the UN Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, these are different individuals and others who will come through talking about Africa, dealing with Africa. We will ask them questions. We will work to get them on the record. We will work to push that, and have been successful thus far, getting them to at least respond to us with questions so that we can begin building that oversight record to push from our side and use our tools. Just a few key provisions of the resolution, those who haven't seen it. It's important to note that while initial draft that had been put out had missed some things, you know, it was important to get that feedback also from the Cameroonian diaspora. And I can't thank you enough. Those of you from around the world who sent feedback to us, whether it's by Twitter or formal letters or those things, you know, not everything you asked for is in there. And part of that is also the sausage making process of getting something out. You can't put everything in because, you know, then it'll get hung up. So we really try to make that compromise. And so some key provisions: conclude and uphold an immediate ceasefire. That's a ceasefire on all sides. And certainly, you know, remember, these are demands that we would like to see our State Department make, and also other international actors. Guarantee unfettered humanitarian access and assistance to Northwest and Southwest regions. Exercise restraint and ensure political protests are peaceful. Establish a credible process. I mean, this is the really important piece here for an inclusive dialogue. And I understand that, you know, many Cameroonians Cameroonians who view this as a crisis and really are disturbed by what has been going on, been affected, don't believe that their government can actually engage in that dialogue, but we must push for it. And if that means bringing out international arbitrators, mediators, and others to come in and help facilitate that process, to get countries like France and others, to get the United Nations involved, those are the things that really this resolution that Senator Risch and others were really trying to put forward in their thinking on this. So it's real important that we follow up, and we have, since the passage of this resolution. We've met with the State Department. They're still organizing themselves. There's a lot of change that goes on in Washington when you change from one administration to another. So we're still working through that. But you do have some constants, which is myself. You've got Karen Bass. You've got Senator Cardin's staff. You've got others who are re-raising these issues and keeping them front and center. I do think it's important moving forward. You'll see people point out and say, well, a Senate resolution, what's that? It's non-binding. It doesn't force anything. Well, you've proven just by this session here and your advocacy efforts and the advocacy efforts of other Cameroonian diaspora that it is possible to take an expression that a resolution puts forward and really help use it as a roadmap to try and bring these issues to another level and hopefully ensure that there's some resolution that can be found here, that we can find a way forward, because what is going on in Cameroon is an absolute catastrophe. It needs international attention. It needs greater engagement from all governments to really move this issue forward. So, this is part of our, this is our small effort, but I'm really encouraged by the way in which Cameroonian diaspora and advocacy groups of all stripes have really come together to sort of rally around these types of initiatives and frankly, to engage other legislatures. I mean, to see, you're going to have Kenya on a panel here. Kenya is now the UN Security Council. We've got a new friend there. I know Ambassador Kimani, who's there in New York. You've got the Gambia, who's done some amazing work on international justice, right? Just with Myanmar. And so, we've got a number of highlights here. And it's great to see the French engaged, because we really, when we put this resolution together, we really wanted to say, listen, we've got to put some markers down. We see them as an important part of moving this forward, of getting something done at an international level. So I'm really encouraged to see that. And of course, our friends in Germany, the UK, and elsewhere have also been really engaged. So we're just thankful for this and much appreciate your efforts.
Thank you very much, JT. The preamble of the resolution clearly lays out the abuses and massacres, extrajudicial killings perpetrated by government security forces, as well as abuses from other armed groups. It calls out France specifically for inaction, and I would say implicitly naming France as an accomplice to these deaths and abuses on civilians. If you were to send a direct appeal to France, what would that be?
Well, we need more from you. I mean, I think what we're saying here in this resolution, and I think what we've continued to say in other efforts, some of which you know about, some of which you don't, but the key here is we see them as an important player. And this is something we heard across the board. Listen, whether it's talking with diplomats in Cameroon, engaging with policymakers, or those from think tanks who study these issues very closely, diaspora who've talked to us and have been in Europe and have engaged with different governments there. We see the French as an important player in helping us to resolve this crisis, to really move the ball. And so the key appeal here is we need more. This isn't enough. What we've seen is not enough. We need more action and more engagement. You do hold keys that, frankly, we don't have, just because of your historic relationship with the BIA government, with the Cameroonian people. There are things you can do that we can't, and you just need to do them, so that again we can continue putting everything that's possible on the table to help move this issue forward.
The resolution comes from a legislative body calling on the international community to engage. We will be having MPs from Africa and Europe in the next panel. How would you expect African legislators to engage in support of the resolution?
Well, I mean, chiefly, as your legislators will tell you, and I'm a staffer, I'm not a member of the Senate, but certainly staff are important. You know, the first thing you can do is you can do your own legislation. Now, of course, every legislative body is going to have its own process, and some of those processes are quite burdensome, depending on which legislature you're in. I've done work when I was at IRI in the Gambian legislature with the Kenyans. I've done work, you know, in a number of African legislatures. So it's not easy to put your own bill together. And it's not as always straightforward, perhaps as the Senate, where a senator can just go to a floor and put something in. So we recognize that. But when you get an interested legislator, they can help build that coalition, facilitate those discussions. When you're on key committees, using that committee process obviously is very important, because it's your moment to really put the matter out there on that platform. Invite those witnesses, whether it is members of the diaspora, specific victims, and frankly also to bring government officials to task, right? Bring the foreign minister over, or other key interlocutors in the government who are responsible for certain aspects of policy, to come in and have those discussions. So there's a lot that can be done, and it's not just about a resolution. The resolution is just a tool in the toolkit. There's a lot of stuff here that you can look at. There's the budget process. I mean, anyone who works in a legislature knows that the budget is a key player here. So is it, you know, we just asked a few questions just today to a few interlocutors over at state and USAID, you know, our agencies that we oversee. You know, what are you spending money on, whether it's democracy and governance projects? When you're doing humanitarian assistance, how is that working? What's, you know, what are we doing with our military assistance? What are we doing with security programs? How are we doing human rights training, and we're paying for it? You know, so what are all of these different things? And then asking those questions, having that dialogue, keeping it front and center. Africa is a huge continent, and the people who work on these issues in legislatures are looking at everything at once. I mean, in one moment I'm talking about Ethiopia, the next minute I'm dealing with the crisis in CAR, and now I'm on a Zoom chat with you. So there's a lot going on. So you've got to keep it front and center. So finding every opportunity to do that is important.
Thank you, JT. I mean, the Biden administration is tapping congressional staffers, which underscores the critical importance of your colleagues for tapping them for critical positions at the Department of State's Bureau for Africa, and also the Bureau for Conflict and Stabilization Operations. We know we're already engaging with the State Department on the way forward for this, with regards to this resolution. What are your expectations from these staffers at the State Department within the spirit of this resolution in leading efforts for mediation and negotiations as mentioned in the resolution?
Well, you know, what's different from congressional staff maybe than some of the colleagues that they'll interact with in these new departments is that we see everything. We see the money that's going into the government, the US government. We are briefed by groups like yourself. So we're seeing the external stuff. Representative Bass talked about trips she's made. So there's a lot of visits, a lot of opportunities to get out. And of course, COVID gets in the way of that, but those networks you're constantly engaging with. Whereas maybe you're a policymaker on the State Department or USAID side, and you're kind of in your lane, you're working on your specific subtopics. So you're the security person, you're only dealing with security, but staffers come over with with a well-rounded, broad group of contacts and networks that I think will be real important. They're also aware of the issues, and because you are handling from so many angles. So I'm hopeful with the creativity, with the dynamism. I know a number of the staffers who've gone over there, just excellent practitioners on African policy, and certainly have been strong advocates within Congress on Cameroon. So you've got good people there in a few real key positions who are going to be advising, whether it is a UN ambassador or a secretary of state or an assistant secretary. And I think those advisors, those staffers working on these issues are going to be crucial to really moving the ball forward inside that interagency bureaucracy. And I think, you know, my legislative friends also part of this will talk about that. Inside government, it's hard to move stuff. It's hard to get decisions made. Large agencies, a lot of opinions, a lot of distractions. And so having people who are really focused on the ball, know how the guts of these institutions work from the outside as oversight folks will be important.
Thanks, JT. It's been a lot of engagement verbally from the international community, statements of condemnation, people saying the right things. But as our people say, words and documents are only important if they are followed by actions. What will the Foreign Relations Committee be doing to see that the actions called out in this resolution are implemented?
Well, as I pointed out, we've already started doing it in many ways, right? Getting our State Department counterparts on the phone and saying, okay, well, the Senate did this on January 1st. Now what? So there are key whereas clauses in there about what we think the US government should be doing, whether it was the Trump administration or the Biden administration or any administration. Here are the things that we would like to see in terms of action from our State Department. So following up on those things, using that as the basis for engagement. As I mentioned, it's important. It's an important process. It's one that people maybe don't fully understand, but really asking those important questions during the nomination process. So you're getting these new officials on the hook and saying, what's your position? Do you commit to following this Anglophone crisis issue? Are you going to do something, and what are you going to do? Here's what we would like to see. And really pushing those types of things will be real important as we move through. Now, on the other side, as I've mentioned, the international front is where we really see the need for greater U.S. engagement, and we've expressed that in our resolution. We think that more needs to be done at the UN. We did ask those questions as we talked to different folks who are going to be nominated for different posts for the U.S. at the UN. We're going to continue to press that as we get briefed on these issues. We think, again, as we interact with our African partners, either ambassadors who are going out or partners who've come in from different governments to brief and talk with us. Speaking with some folks in the UK embassy the other day on Cameroon, the French have reached out in different ways, making sure that they also understand that we need to see some action, because there are things that we can do, whether, sanctions, looking at our assistance portfolio, thinking about ways in which we can directly engage the government, how to balance that relationship. But there are also things that other governments can do. And frankly, I think everyone needs to just work together. This can't be done by one country alone. Can't be done by France alone. Can't be done by the US alone. It can't be done by one African government or other. It really needs a collective effort. This is something, given the Cameroonian government's placement in a number of key issues, whether it's a security crisis in the north of the country that the international community is really engaged in, and that does play a role in decision-making and policy, or it's economic relationships, all of that comes into play. So you really need to bring everyone together and say, listen, you have your interests, but how do we make sure that we, first of all, we all agree this is a crisis, but then how do we work together to help resolve it? And saying that we're not going to allow our interests to get in the way of real strong action. That's going to take time. It's not going to happen tomorrow. And we know that people are dying every day in these regions under this crisis. So we also have to sort of be pushing on our humanitarian colleagues and others who are working in this space to make sure that we're getting that strong reporting. So when issues are coming up, when the diaspora is sending us information, whether it's on social media or informal submissions, that we're taking that data and we're feeding it into the system.
Thank you, JT. We're running a little bit late. We just have one last question. The resolution talks about an independent investigation of the right violations, including the death of a U.S. citizen, Charles Wisco. The investigation of the Ngabo massacre, as you know, is known to have no transparency. The Biden administration is joining the United Nations Human Rights Council. Do you agree that the United States should lead efforts in the council for a fact-finding mission to investigate and document all the atrocities committed, to hold perpetrators account, stop a culture of impunity, and also to as an interim measure to pursue sanctions as well?
Listen, the UN is an important body to have those conversations and to really raise this. And as I've said over and over again, it's one of the key aspects of the resolution. It's one of the key elements of international engagement, Human Rights Council, the UN Security Council. There are other fora within the UN that are really important to this. Obviously, the United States being at the table, the Human Rights Council will be an important aspect of that. But certainly building coalitions across the UN bodies will be also real important. You can't do this in one place and not in the other. Again, it has to be holistic. You have to come at this and say, well, we're not going to go to the Human Rights Council, do one thing. We're going to do this in the UN period. And here's where we're going to do it in these 15 different ways. And so that's what we're pushing for. That's what we'd like to see.
Thank you very much, JT, for taking the time to be with us. That will be our last question. So the coalition will really look forward to the days ahead. We will continue to work with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and with the Congress as a whole, as well as the Department of State, to hopefully get a fact-finding mission to investigate the abuses and to also ensure that there is an international multilateral mediation and negotiations process to address the root cause of the conflict. JT, thanks a lot for really taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us, and thanks for the collaboration and for listening to us. Like you said at the beginning, we had a rough ride. You've had a rough ride with us, but thank you for re-engaging, and thank you for taking the Cameroon case to heart and making sure that we bring peace.
Thank you. And, as I've said to you, Judith and Henry, on multiple occasions, the Cameroonian diaspora is very diverse. They have a wide section of experiences. But as I said to you on the first day, what's going to make you most effective is to find a way to work together and get everyone together. And I'm really encouraged by this and other programs I've been seeing lately. And I think it's going to be very helpful for us. When you come to us with that one thing and you come to us together, that unification is real important. I'm sure other colleagues here will stress that as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, JC. We're looking forward to working with you and your colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now move to the second panel. Permit us to set the stage for a very good conversation on the need to engage different parliaments from different countries. While we do so, please continue to share the Coalition's Human Rights Incident report and tracking tool. We want to make sure we document all the abuses in the ongoing conflict, in part to hold perpetrators to account. So while Kevin is setting the stage to make sure we have all our panelists for the next session, Kevin, are we okay? Are we good?
Yes, please, the panelists, if you're ready.
Okay,
thank you.
This session will explore how parliaments can build on this Senate resolution and the potential actions and engagements from different countries across the globe. But we want to also take this opportunity to thank MPs in the UK, particularly Honorable Leila Moron for initiating the early day motion that aligns with the Senate resolution calling on the UK government to work with global partners to address the root causes of the conflict through mediated negotiations. A hearing is also scheduled in the Canadian Parliament on Tuesday, February 16. All these efforts and actions following the lead from the US Senate, which demonstrates the need for an engaged UN leadership in addressing the conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, let us start this session by introducing the panelists. Judith, we are told that Honorable Kaufmann from Germany has an emergency, so we'll endeavor to make sure he shares his remark before we begin. Judith, please, can we start to introduce the panelists for the next session?
Thank you so much, Henry. Thanks for that. Everybody, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Stefan Kaufmann, a member of the German Parliament alliance between the Christian Democratic Union of Germany and the Christian Social Union. He is a lawyer and researcher by profession and a member of the Christian Democratic Union of Germany since 1998. He's also district chairman of the party. He's been district chairman of the party in Stuttgart since 2011. Since 2019, Dr. Kaufmann has been the co-chair of the Federal Committee for Education, Research and Innovation of the CDU in Germany. Honorable Kaufmann has been a member of the German Bundestag since 2009. From 2014 to 2020, he was chairman of the CDU-CSU parliamentary group in the Committee for Education, Research and Technology Assessment. From 2018 to 2020, Dr. Kaufmann was chairman of the Study Commission on Vocational Training in the Digital World of Work, and from June 2020, the Innovation Officer of Green Hydrogen of the Federal Ministry of Education and Research. Join me to welcome Dr. Kaufmann. Thank you, Dr. Kaufmann, for accepting our invitation. And as Henry has mentioned, we know you have to drop off at the top of the hour, so we will hand over to you to make your comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the friendly introduction and for the invitation to this important event. And yes, dear Senator Makori, dear colleague Bergman, dear colleague Nadot, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the possibility to speak before starting the panel and bring in a German perspective. I'm elected member, as has been said, of the German Bundestag since 2009, and my main work is about research and education, not foreign and security policy, just to say that. But I worked together with some local Cameroon activists for many years, and that's the reason why I was also invited to this panel. My main goal is to convince the Cameroonian government to take serious action to come to a peaceful solution of this conflict. Too many people, even children, died in the last years, and the weapons should be silent. A stop of any military action should be our common goal. So I welcome the US Senate's resolution as an important step to hold the Cameroon government responsible for the actions that take place in Cameroon. In my opinion, we should bring up a similar address on European level that includes first, possible sanctions to individual government that separates leaders involved in crimes against humanity. Second, humanitarian aid to economic recovery aid and medical aid in the fight against the coronavirus in North and Southwest Cameroon. Third, the economic pressure to hold the Cameroon's government accountable. And fourth, to discuss the crisis in international fora, including also the United Nations Security Council. In Germany, the government's focus on this crisis could be better, to be honest. Mr. Noke, the Commissioner for Africa of the government, called for a German response to the conflict during a visit in 2019. The problem is and was so far that this is a so-called inner conflict within the country, so other countries may say the problem have to be solved within the country. But Germany, that's my point of view, has a responsibility, and special historic responsibility to the people of Cameroon, which has to do for sure with its colonial past. So I will talk to my colleagues in the government and highlight the US Senate resolution. We have to find a similar answer. We have to do more about this forgotten conflict in Cameroon. And we do it best in a joint effort and a joint approach together with especially France and other European countries, also such as Switzerland. So thank you for organizing this important conference, and all the best for your important work. And again, sorry that I have to leave at 12 noon time. But it was important for me to give this short German perspective on the conflict, and I will try to do my best to give an impact on the solutions then. Thank you very much to you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kaufman. We look forward to engaging with you after this, with your colleagues, as well as a more engaged European Union with German support. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in a very short while. The next panelist is Honorable Darren Berkman. Honorable Berkman is a member of the Foreign Relations and Cooperation Committee of the South African Parliament and a member of the South African Legislature since 2014. He also serves as Vice Chair of the Democracy, Governance and Human Rights Commission of the Southern African Development Community Parliamentary Forum. Honorable Berkman is a member of the political leadership of the Liberal International Human Rights Committee, an international organization that promotes liberalism and human rights. He currently serves as the Deputy Shadow Minister of International Relations and Cooperation and a member of the Sports Committee. He previously served as Treasurer of the African Liberal Network. Thank you, Honorable Berkman, for joining us in this discussion.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me, and hello to all my colleagues. It is indeed a great pleasure to be here. I know that the time zones are different, so for me it's actually the evening. And you know, the topic to me is very dear to me because I think conflict in Africa is something that, you know, we've suffered this for centuries. It's always been, Africa's always been the scene of you know, be it slavery or be it you know, be it colonialism. We've always been the playground for all this type of violence, and the problem has been understanding the conflict, where it stemmed from, why it's there, and why this continent is still seen as the continent of aid and not trade. And for me, what's always been a yardstick is to try and understand where the conflict arises. Is why do areas like Americas or the Europes look in South Africa, oh, sorry, not just South Africa, look in Africa, and it's almost a parachute approach. You know, we look in a country and we come to a country and we look into that country. When it comes to Africa itself, though, it requires, you know, there's that saying, Africans for Africa's problems, because Africa is not for sissies. And there's that, you know, there's that saying that Africa requires, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. But I'd not known about Resolution 684 before I received the invitation. And obviously I'd known about what was taking place in Cameroon, but I have an extensive knowledge in conflict in the Middle East. I have an extensive knowledge in Morocco, in the Russia-Ukraine. These are the areas in which I have an interest in trying to see what would lead to peace. When it comes to Africa, we're looking at violent. You know, the model is always violent. And when I looked at Resolution 684, the violence comes in three sizes. You know, we're talking about terrorism, we're talking about civil war, and you're talking about an age-old Anglophone conflict. Now, in fact, SADC, the region in which I come from, is suffering exactly the same. We're about to suffer the same problem, and exactly the same. It's got exactly the same enemies, ironically, because Total, which is a French company, is there as well. So today's debate couldn't have interested me more, in the sense, or discussion couldn't have interested me more, in the sense that I think you've got something here that you can watch from the start. It emanated in the Senate, and is going to go all the way up through the channels from the African Union up to the, you know, up to the United Nations Security Council, and then watch it come right down to ground level. The problem is we're very heavy on words, and it's the translation into action in which I always find interesting. And for me, most of the CV you read out today has always been less on the CV and more about on the ground, you know, what one can do to be more on the ground. And usually what I say again with the parachute approach is that I'm less about talk and more about what we can do. And I look forward to today's discussion because I look forward to hearing what it is that we take from Resolution 684 and what we take forward to taking it from the words into the actions. Because for my purpose in Africa has always been to take it from a continent of aid and move it to a continent of trade, where we are not just we are not just a continent that looks like a continent that always needs handouts, but that we actually become a continent that is actually equal trading partners. And you'll hear from our colleague minister from Kenya the exact same thing, that we're building infrastructure, we're building the free trade agreements in Africa that will tend us towards better trade conditions and better, we're the ones that are rich in resources. We're the ones that have the manpower. It's just we're always historically have been the exploited ones. Now, hopefully, we're turning ourselves around, and hopefully the next time we have this panel will be, you know, the more productivity you see from Africa, the less conflict and the less violence you should see as well. So thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Honorable Bergman, and thanks for joining the discussion. Unfortunately, Senator Beatrice McCrory is not able to join right now for some unfortunate circumstances. But she's very committed to continue working with the CDN, and we are hoping that maybe during the call she might still join, but for some unfortunate circumstances, she's not able to join us right now. Henry, I'll hand over to you to introduce Honorable Nadeau.
Honorable Sebastien Nadeau is a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the French Parliament from Haute-Garonne since 2017 and serves as chair of the France Quebec All-Party Parliamentary Friendship Group. He is the rapporteur of the mission on the Democratic Refoundation of the European Union. Honorable Nadeau has authored several historical essays and novels, including Amadou Vamulke, Lettre de la France depuis Condengui in 2019, translated into English in 2020 with the title Cameroon, We All Have to Stop This Comedy. He holds a doctorate degree from École de Haute Études and Sciences Sociales in France, in Paris. Honorable Nadeau, thank you for accepting our invitation to participate in this forum, in this panel.
Well, hello everyone. First, I want to thank the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiation, and especially Judith and Juana for inviting me to this virtual forum about United Senate Resolution 684 today. Will you excuse my so French accent, I hope. Thank you also for Karen Bass' introductions, and also to J.T. Tomaszewski asking, I quote, collective efforts. Well, as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the French Parliament, I look at the situation in Cameroon for the first time when I learned about Amadou Vamulke, former director of the CRTV, the Cameroon Radio Television. This journalist is still in prison, which makes me deeply concerned about the freedom of the press in Cameroon. And one might think that this injustice, the lack of humanity and the prison policy of which Amadou Vamulke is a victim is far removed from the subject that brings us together today and from the dramatic situation experienced by Cameroonians in the English-speaking region of their country. There are two different subjects, that's right, but they are based on the same evils. When a dictatorship becomes harder and more centralized as its leader ages, like it is for Paul Biya, the first consequence is that the rule of the law is violated everywhere. The Cameroonian dictatorship does not recognize the right to be different. For example, homosexuality is still criminalized in Cameroon. It also does not recognize the specificities inherent in the diversity that history, geography, and culture entail within a few individuals or even in wider society, as is the case for Southern Cameroon. But this dictatorship, which wants to crush individuals, particularly those who do not conform, finds all its strength in the weakness of the international community. Cameroon has signed the United Nations Charter of San Francisco and many other international treaties that should bind it. If it is not respecting these treaties, then it is because the international community does not hold it to account. Within the international community, we can hardly count on non-democratic countries to remind Cameroon of its obligations. Also, given the country's past and the international configuration, the United States, France, and to a lesser extent, maybe Great Britain and Germany should be very active. Speaking about Southern Cameroon for France, I mean for French government, I am so sorry to say today that about my country, but I have clearly to say France is silent. And the resolution 684 insisted on. France remains a key player, not yet convinced of the urgency and the need now to act. But let's talk about the good news. The transpartisan work in the United States Senate with this resolution shows a strong determination on the American side, which has since been confirmed by Anton Blinken and Joe Biden. It can be added that many delegations from member countries of the United Nations Security Council have expressed their very strong concern about Southern Cameroon during the last sessions. Because of that, that's why Senate Resolution 684 is so important. Paralyzed for a long time, the international community is now in a position to find a new dynamic that would allow Cameroon to be put under surveillance, thus ending the cycle of violence in which the country finds itself. The French Constitution gives me a precise role in evaluating and monitoring the action of my government. In terms of diplomacy vis-à-vis Cameroon and the extremely violent conflict underway in this country, I realize that France is not playing the role it should and that it must revise its strategy as soon as possible. But as a representative of the French nation, and it's a lot of citizens, because I also discuss with many Cameroonian stakeholders, and because of the situation in Southern Cameroon, I solemnly asked all my colleague MP here and diplomats that the situation in Cameroon need to be on the agenda of the next session of the Security Council of the United Nations, organized in March 2021 under presidency of United States of America. Stop the violence in Cameroon, start a political process. This is an emergency. And well, I know that the time is not so long. That's all I want to say for the moment. But this call to a special meeting at the next Security Council session is very, very important. I will be happy to answer any question after. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Nado and Honorable Bergman, for your very good opening remarks. Now we'll move to an open discussion with questions from participants that builds on your remarks and the resolution itself. Let me start with you, Honorable Nado. Resolution 684 calls for the root causes of the conflict to be addressed. At the core of this armed conflict, as known to many Southern Cameroonians, is the lack of a treaty of union between the former British Southern Cameroons and the Republic of Cameroon. Cameroon celebrated her 50th anniversary in 2010. That's from 1960 to 2010, in which Ali Trika, the president of the 64th session of the UN General Assembly, handed 2 maps. This happened after Southern Cameroonians had explored peaceful means through different fora, especially the All Anglophone Conference in 1993 in Buea, and the Second Anglophone Conference in Bamenda in 1994, and through peaceful means through protests in 2016. The government's brutal response caused the current civil war, the ongoing civil war. In 2019, President Biya said in Paris, and I'll quote, "We have tried to assimilate them," end of quote, fanning the flame more. You are currently seeing few reports of the massacres of children, students, and women on your screen. Some as recent as January 2021, just last month. This resolution explicitly calls France's inaction. Of course, France is a major international influencer to the Cameroon, to the Biya regime. With this in mind, do you believe durable peace can ever return without international mediation and negotiations? And do you agree that the inaction from Paris as a major player makes France an accomplice to the massacre of these children, these students, and women, including pregnant women in the Southern Cameroons?
Well, I think it's very clear from my part. My government is not doing what he has to do. And the example is very basic. You have these massacres in Ngab, and France had the presidency of the Security Council of the United Nations it was in July 2020. And I asked before this, a long time before, to the French Foreign Affairs Minister and to the representative to the French United Nations mission to put at the agenda the question of fact-finding mission on the ground in Cameroon about all these massacres and this violence. And France had the possibility to put it at the agenda, and France did nothing. So my answer is very clear. You have this organization in France, you have the executive power, the government, they are silent. Until now, they did nothing, okay? And you have a representative like me, and so French citizens, they are not really aware of what happened in Cameroon. And second, when they are aware of this, they ask France to do something because it's unbearable. So I hope I answer your question. And so in my asking about a special meeting at the United Nations Security Council in March, it's to put the pressure on the French government, because it's one of the key. It's a collective problem. So you have to put together all the partners. And if there is someone who is absent, it's very complicated, even for a so powerful country as United States, to find a solution. So I try to put the pressure on my government, but we need to put the pressure from Germany, from Great Britain, from everywhere, of course, from Cameroonians, but from everywhere on the French government, because it's one of the main key of the problem. That is to say, you have dictatorship, and to stop the violence, you have to change this game, which is played by Paul Biya and his government at the moment. So yes, of course, I'm not agree with the action of French executive power at the moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Honorable Bergman, you hold a very strategic position in the SADC Parliamentary Forum, and you well noted that Africa has to play a more engaged role in resolving its own conflict. And I agree with you. The American government has echoed that through President Biden's speech with the African Union, that the US is prepared to work with the African Union to ensure that conflicts and human rights issues are addressed in Africa. That echoes America's understanding that Africa needs to also participate in resolving its own conflict. But of course, you will understand that the United States, being a guarantor of human rights and peace, cannot watch if Africa is not acting. And so this resolution provides that an opportunity for Africans, for African countries and African members of parliament to engage. Now you have strategic rules, not just in the SADC Parliamentary Forum, but also as a board member in the Liberal International Human Rights Committee. You have taken time to go through the resolution that highlights the human rights violations and call for an independent investigation of the abuses and engagement from the international community. Do you support the United Nations Human Rights Council should appoint a fact-finding mission to investigate possible reports of genocide and crimes against humanity in the ongoing conflict? And how can you assist for this to happen?
Oh, that's a great question. But let me just start off. I think Andy and Mary have come up with great comments on the side, or questions. In Africa, we have the African Union, as is already put in the resolution, and as you've already mentioned. What has the African Union done for any of the conflicts that have taken place on the continent? And South Africa has just finished chairing the African Union. Now, we've already seen what COVID has done. COVID has given the cover to some of our leaders to maybe progress in power nefariously, in stealing power or taking on extra terms in power. To watch that has been a bit of it's been a bit sad when you look at areas like Tanzania, you look at areas like Uganda, and we see military, taking over and that. And we ask ourselves, well, what is the African Union there for the people, or is the African Union there for the leaders? So when it comes to things like civil war, or terrorism, or the genocide, who's the African Union protecting? And it's almost, when you see the picture, it almost becomes a gentleman's club. And countries are paying big money to be members of these organizations, make no mistake. So for us, the president had to oversee the COVID-19 crisis in his own country, one of the worst economic crises in his own country, and he had to chair the African Union as well as take the seat of the United Nations Security Council. That stretched his chair, and what we would put as a motion for the next time is that he possibly should have proxied his seat to another, either deputy president in our country, or an ex-president or deputy president, someone maybe like Thabo Mbeki or Kgalema Motlanthe, who were presidents in our country in the past, that are still being paid a salary and would have done a great job being permanent members in the African Union. They could have overseen conflict, let's say in Cameroon. They could have gone to Cameroon and maybe played a far more permanent role in maybe putting people around the table. When it comes to structures like the AU or the UN, again, I think it's time that the UN has to be reformed. Because when you look at the votes that are taken against countries that have human rights abuses, we do see countries taking vetoes. I mean, if you look at America, you look at China, you look at Russia, you see that you can see that sometimes it's not about the actual atrocities. It's more about the friendships or the alliances. And South Africa itself is caught up in some of these votes. So what we see, we're seeing human rights taking place. We're seeing certain countries fill up the agenda on these human rights, but there's far worse atrocities taking place. And you just have to look at the United Nations human rights agendas, where you see something like the Palestinian-Israel conflict would take up 70%, but you've got Cameroon, you've got Syria, you've got Yemen. There's enough to take up that should be debated, because there's genocide that's killing far more people, and we're talking death than if you take other conflicts that are taking up more of the agenda. And I'm not saying any conflict is not as bad, but I'm saying that we should highlight as many of the human rights conflicts as we can. Then when we go and check, what we call check or oversight these countries, what can you oversight when you fly in? There's 5 or 10 people, they go on a rapporteur, they get to this country. What can they see? They really can only see what that country allows them to see. So you may get to a refugee camp, you may get to some hospital, you may get to 1 or 2 other strategic points. But realistically speaking, how are you going to oversight 5 years of conflict? How are you going to oversight the actual what's really going on the ground at that point in time, and what's going on in what's going to be happening when you report back? Now, we've seen in the past, and I can take it from EU reports, I can take it from the APC reports that take place in reports that we've taken in Africa. When oversight committees come to us, and it's a quick drop in and drop out, and we've seen it in electioneering activity, election observation committee, election observer missions, they come and report on elections when the election is taking place, but an election is not stolen during the balloting of the votes. An election is stolen as soon as the election is called, when constituencies are drawn up, when voters are intimidated, voters are harassed. That's when the proper, that's when the voter rigging starts, because there's intimidation in it. The voter mission does not see that. And it's the same with conflict. So the reform that we need to do is we need to have a proper checklist. When we send in people, they need to go to all sides of the conflict. They need to genuinely speak, and speak not just to the leaders or not just to the victims. They have to speak and interrogate all sides of that conflict and speak to both leader, victims, and everyone else, doctors. Was there chemical weapons used? Was there torture? What else was used? Did you see any other weapons in storage? Was anything, there's so many things that checklist could give us that would allow us to give a full-on bird's eye view of what really took place, that anyone sitting in that meeting afterwards on any given report would have an exact view of what took place during that conflict or genocide or civil war, had they been there on the ground. The problem is, again, is translation. A lot of our reports get lost in translation. So we have to have it in such a way that whether I go there and English is my first language, or you go there and French is your first language, that what you're seeing is what you're describing, and that what I'm reading from you is what you said, what you saw. So these are the kind of things that make that type of report that much important. So when Russia describes something, it is just as bad when South Africa is reading it. It is just as big a human rights abuse as when Saudi Arabia is reading it, regardless of the fact that Saudi Arabia might have as much as a human rights problem in their country, whatever the case may be. Secondly, as I said, is these bodies need reform. It cannot be business as usual. It cannot be that you sit in the UN and you talk and you talk and you talk and you take a vote and you take a vote and you say, this is what you're going to do and this is what you will do. And then 4 years later, people are still killing each other. That you can put up a picture on this Zoom meeting of something that we knew about 4 years ago. That children that were born 4 years ago are still being killed today. The institutions that were there to protect us are still then failing us. And that's the reform we talk about. So, you know, as I said, reform needs to take place. It needs to take place from the UN down to the regional bodies. And that's where I'm hoping these resolutions, when we have these resolutions, we also include the fact that when we lobby the African Union, that we're going to partner with them, that you're going to stick with the African Union to make sure that you don't just give them the money or you don't just give them the wherewithal, but that you stick with them on the ground. Interestingly enough, through our research, most monies that come to Africa in aid never really reaches the bottom part of that ground. So when it gets to a tender, or when it gets to some form of the project, there's usually a delay, or there's usually this or that. The intended recipient, unfortunately, there's always some form of an excuse, but you will see in certain countries, you'll see these lavish mansions and you'll see these lavish cars and what have yous with certain leaders. And these are the kind of things that if you partnered and you didn't just leave the aid there and flew back, if we partnered and till the end of the project. And sorry, just one last thing, I don't want to hog the floor, but on what Mr. Nadot was saying, a peace plan doesn't just finish overnight. What we need is a roadmap to peace. So when you sell a vision, you say to someone, listen, what we're going to do is, this is what the peace will look like. We shake hands today, but by next week, we will both have this. We will both be getting this. We will both have this, but this is the plan to work towards. And it's not impossible that both sides, if they see the plan, and there's the third party watching the plan, and the African Union could be the broker to do this for all international players. But we have to find the broker that has the least interest in the African Union that can do this effectively. Thank you.
This question is for Honorable Nadeau. The international community, including France, have all called for mediation and inclusive dialogue, and yet France has not demonstrated any political will, as demanded by the Senate resolution, to get the Biya government to negotiate with the leaders of the armed groups. Do you see this tactic as undermining any ongoing negotiation efforts, or a delayed tactic so the Biya government can continue with the military solution, which breeds more human rights abuses without addressing the root cause of the conflict?
It would take a lot of time to speak about the roots of the conflict, because of course you have in this a part of history, a part of the way colonialism and neocolonialism colonialism is at the moment. But the fact is, at the moment, France is not on the way to help to solve the problem. France is not able to solve alone this problem. It's very important problem, and the problem has to be solved first by the Cameroonian people and countries all around, I think, and why not at the scale of the continent of Africa. But of course, we need a change from part of France, because if France is continuing to sustain Paul Biya or someone like him just after, it's a way to sustain a system that maintain the same way of thinking. And I think at the moment, the military option from part of Cameroonian government is maybe starting. So the question is, we need to show France, international community need to act. By the way, to show France, you have to change. And then if France just change his way of sustaining Paul Biya government as it is until now, clearly, we can have a new place to talk and to start a dialogue. And GT Tomaszewski tell us it will take a long time. So we have two things. We have really an important call now to stop violence, but at the same time, we have to start something to begin a political process, because of course the roots of the problems are in the political system of Cameroon. It is the French political system on a country very, very different. It is impossible for Cameroon to do exactly the same as in France. And you know, in France, it's very far from being perfect. So for another country to transfer, to translate, yes, translate, there is no translation, in fact. It's the French system on another country. And Cameroon has to let this and find another solution. So we have to put the pressure on French government to change the things. It's very important now. And of course, France is not able to directly stop the violence from some groups of separatists. But if in a side the violence stopped, we can open a dialogue. And at this moment, with a dialogue, we can have this hope that for a moment, the moment of the dialogue, we have something like a ceasefire from all parts. And then, if the dialogue is a real dialogue, we can have a hope for the process after and the new building Cameroon needs. But the question of this new building is not a question to French like me. It's the question of Cameroonian people. But France has a role, and international community has a role to put the pressure to let all the parties, all the stakeholders be in situation of this dialogue. And at the moment, France doesn't help. That's what I can see, and that's what, as someone, I'm in the parliament. I'm parliament member. The mandate, it's a mandate of citizens. I don't have to accept what my government is doing. You know, it's a different place of power. In France, you have executive power, legislative power, and the justice. Of course, they are linked, but as far as I'm concerned, I am not in the same option at the moment on the question of Cameroon with my government, and I'm trying to play my role inside, but I ask international community to put the pressure, of course, on Cameroonian people, like in this resolution, but also on France, because it's somewhere you will find a key.
Thank you very much, Honorable Nado. But just to say that France has considerable powers and leverage over Cameroon. President Macron himself said that he called President Biya for the release of Maurice Kamto, regardless of the number of protests and requests made by Cameroonian citizens to release Kamto. He was only released until when they had pressure from the French government. So we believe that negotiations, France is not the one, will not be the one making the negotiations or on the negotiation table to tell what Cameroon should do or what Southern Cameroonians should do. But France can play a very critical role based on historical precedents that France has that leverage to tell Biya and the regime that now you need to go you need to negotiate with armed separatists, because any delay, the cost is on the lives of kids, children, the lives of people who are going to school. We believe strongly that France can do more than what it's doing now, and that's why the resolution explicitly called France to do more. But let me move to you, Honorable Bergman. I think you did mention reform of the AU or the UN, but while we are looking towards that reform, people continue to die. Kids continue to stay out of school. Women continue to deliver in the bushes, and there's a lot of crisis still going on. While we are waiting for those reforms, which may not come maybe in the next 2, 3, 5 years, what should be done? The Senate resolution recommends targeted sanctions as a tool that the American government can use to push the Cameroon government to negotiate. We've had a lot of negotiations in Africa. Of course, we know that Nairobi, at times Kenya, is referred like the capital of peace agreements in Africa. So we've had a lot of governments, presidents negotiating with armed groups in their own countries, and not even if they are fighting, but they still find the time to negotiate with them. Given the commitment of President Biya, who has been in power for over 38 years, to continue with the military solution, killing unarmed civilians, including children, burning down kids alive, killing of students and women, do you support sanctions as a tool to push the government to negotiate, just as negotiation paved the way for peace to return in South Africa?
Look, I'm going to be very frank. I think people shudder when I talk. They call it Darwinism, but I'm going to be very frank. I go to conferences with my colleagues. We go to Europe, and we go to these conferences, and we talk about Africa. Now, we know in Africa, we talk about hunger. We talk about real severe hunger. We talk about job shortages, and we talk about hunger. We're talking about child-headed households. We talk about women-headed households. We know the conditions. We know about droughts. We know about migration, climate change. And then you'll hear us talking about that. And then you'll hear someone get up, well-meaning and well-intended, but they will say, they'll talk about air quality and they'll talk about the animals and the environment. Now, we know First World wise, both are important. We know why it's important for the environment. But how do you tell a starving person, a hungry person, that they've got to care for animals? Now, the point is that we're cross communicating, because you're almost selling that we're dealing with animals. Animals are more important than people in certain people's minds. You know, it's almost like the European countries are worried about more worried about animals in Africa than people in Africa, when in certain aspects. When you're at a conference, and then us from Africa sit there wondering how we're sitting at the same conference, because we're not dealing with my hunger, we're not dealing with my unemployment, we're not dealing with my basic needs in the situation. Now, if you take Africa as a whole, and you take certain situations in Somalia, you take certain Cameroon, Sudan, we're dealing with situations where government has got no control on the whole land. So what is it tended to? It's tended towards a new state being created in areas that are not fully controlled. What am I talking about? I'm talking about terrorism. I'm talking about land that can be exploited. I'm talking about land that can become a new state, where people can come in and start a new tax regime, can start their own new law, and can start almost their own new country. Now, once you have that, you're starting something that you cannot control, because now you've got a problem on your hands. You've got brother killing brother. Now, once you've got brother killing brother, do you call it terrorism or do you call it civil war? Because now the definition caters for both, but now the response is different, because the one allows for America, Europe, Russia, Turkey to get involved. And the other one is just let that country sort themselves out. Yet this problem in Africa during COVID, where the economy crisis is worsening, is blossoming. So now what we're having is we're seeing countries are getting desperate. Countries are having the haves holding on to their power, the haves holding on to their money, and the have-nots getting hungrier. So they're turning to where the money's easier. They're turning, so where people are even advertising for jobs openly saying, you know, come join us, come be teachers, come be educated. Those jobs are, let me tell you, those aren't teacher jobs. Those aren't normal educator jobs. Now, these are the kind of things that Africa has become a playground of exploited people. Again, we're going to go through a second rise of colonialism, not necessarily now from the British and not necessarily from the French. Now it's a new era of countries. So the problem is how do we stop this? How do we break this cycle of habits? And as I started, I will end, is that it's not about aid. It's just about trade. So where America had it right with South Africa was the trade agreements, is that you have the power to negotiate with every country in Africa. You could give us trade tariffs at a favorable rate. You could bring us those products at a reduced rate to South Africa or to anywhere in Africa and help us. And China can do the same, and Russia can do the same, and we could then trade cheaply. The problem with us in Africa, and I'm sorry my sister wasn't here from Kenya, is that to get a container from China to Kenya costs $600. But to get that container anywhere from Kenya to anywhere in Africa, even next door to Uganda or even to Zambia, anywhere in Africa from Kenya costs $1,600. So it's more expensive to get that container from one country in Africa to another country in Africa than it is to get it from one continent to Africa. And the reason being is our infrastructure. So what we need is investment in infrastructure, but the only way we can do it is if we start intra-trading country to country in Africa. Our trade between countries in Africa is so low. So what we've done is we've introduced a free trade agreement in Africa that will hopefully help ourselves. But again, who's watching us when it comes to leaders behaving badly? Who's watching us when it comes to President Bayer having as many terms as he likes in power? Who's watching us when it comes to other presidents running for terms as long as they want? But then the problem is, what do you do now? You talk about sanctions. Historically, sanctions has shown no help to the people on the ground. It has only shown negativity. So there's an organization called Bright Spark, and Bright Spark shows that if you do positive reward or positive punishment, that is of value. So as I said, the trade agreements, instead of sanctions, rather give trade agreements, better trade agreements to the people, rather give something that can benefit the people. We probably find that, where a country is behaving, take away their trade agreements. So the country's going to, negotiate tougher trade agreement, the country's probably going to start behaving, especially if their neighbors are going to be able to trade at far cheaper rates, and their neighbors are going to have better infrastructure, and their neighbors are going to prosper, but they're not going to. Because the more economic activity, the better education, the more infrastructure, the less terrorism, the less civil war, and the less chance of gangsterism, the less chance of unemployment, and the less chance of homelessness and crime. And this is what we're up against. And I'm telling you now that as we go through that theory and we do that, that's our answer in Africa. We will get Africa to rise. We committed to getting Africa to rise, but it's going to take the right help from the people across the sea to not come at us with sanctions, or not just to come at us with aid, but to come at with us with support, and come with us with the experience, but to watch us through it, to make sure that the money, as I said, is going to the right people, to make sure that trade agreements are introduced that would support us and not punish us. So yeah, we can do it, and do it we will. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Bergman, for that good response and for highlighting the trade agreements. I'll put my question in possibly two sections. One of them is the first bit of the question. I just want to highlight the fact that in South Africa, you have close to 50,000 Southern Cameroonians who live and work and pay taxes in South Africa. So my first question would be, how engaged would the South African government be, and you in particular in your personal capacity, to listen to these Southern Cameroonians and push and commit to push and advocate for an end to the conflict? Secondly, going back to your talk about trade sanctions, in the resolution, it specifically calls for punitive actions, including sanctions, and we are talking not just trade sanctions, right? We are talking about sanctions that are also used against people who are committing, individuals who are committing human rights abuses. How are you and within your government going to make sure that you back up the United States, you back up the International Criminal Court, you back up other arms within the international arena to be able to make sure that those who are perpetrating these acts are actually sanctioned? As you rightly put it, we don't want sanctions that will affect the general public, but we also want sanctions that will go to individuals and make those individuals realize that they cannot get away with that kind of impunity anymore.
Excellent questions. I mean, for us, we ignored the Mozambique issue for too long. It started in 2014. I think it started around even the same time as Cameroon, and we ignored it for too long. Now that it's 2021, we're realizing it's too late. And I think the easiest thing to say now is that Cameroon's too far away for us to react. But then when it comes to our doorstep, it will be too late. So, as I said, it's comfortable and convenient for me to say it's not a SADC issue, because SADC is in a different region. But what I will do, and you have a commitment on this, is that I will be writing to my minister, and I will tell my minister that this has to be put on the AU agenda, and that this has to be lobbied in the AU as something that's cannot be left behind anymore. That this has to be taken up with the US Senate, that this is being discussed in the US Senate, and the AU have to get onto the line as quick as possible and see where the synergy can be, you know, where they can be together on this. It's vitally important. In terms of the second question, oh, my mind's just gone blank.
The second question, so the first one was about the fact that you have a lot of Southern Cameroonians living in South Africa and your commitment. And then the second part was regarding the sanctions. Right. Yes, you don't want trade sanctions, but we need to make sure that we have targeted sanctions. Yeah.
You know, as I said, I'm just finding that the sanctions at this stage, you just have to look at Zimbabwe now. You know, the leaders find their way around sanctions. They seem to always find a willing buyer, willing seller proposition. So for every Western ally or Western foe, there's an Eastern ally, so to speak. So that's our problem. So the sanctions are hurting in certain areas, but there's always some willing country. We don't understand, you know, this Western-Eastern dynamic in Africa is exploitive, and it's the leaders that are bringing this battle to Africa. It's the people that are suffering, and that's why the sanctions is a hot potato, whereas trade tariffs is a far less brutal system in that everyone benefits from trade tariffs. And as I say, the president, that country cannot flourish when countries around you are flourishing, shouldn't be voted in, and would not see an Arab Spring, or, you know, there would be demonstrations, mass demonstrations in that country. He would be very fearful, or she would be very fearful to carry on running in that country if that was what was happening in the countries around. So that would be the long-term picture, as I say.
Thank you very much, Honorable Berkman. Yeah, I think like Judith said, the economic sanctions are usually very punitive, not just to the leaders or the government, but also to the civilian population. But things like travel sanctions, you know, the freeze of assets of leaders are very, very effective. I mean, if not of the fear of sanctions, the Gambia wouldn't have been what it is today. You know, they wouldn't have been a peaceful transition in DRC. And so sanctions play a very critical role in making sure that leaders actually, you know, stay and respect the constitution of countries and get to peace agreements for conflicts to end. Honorable Nado, let me just dive in. Maybe this should be the last questions, I guess. I would like to answer maybe a yes or no. Do you agree that the British people had the right to vote for Brexit, and that the Scottish people had the right to vote for self-determination, regardless of the outcome?
Well, the question of, in French, we call it autodetermination. Yes, it's of course a question of democracy, but the question is, at the moment, are all the conditions to say we are going to organize a vote? No, I think there is a lot of things to do before, because of the situation. But of course, you know, I'm following another subject. For example, in Spain, you have this problem with Catalonia. You have something special, you know, I'm working with Quebec in Canada, and there is something built with a peaceful process now, and regularly people of Quebec are in situation to say, we want this sort of organization with federal government of Canada. We want to quit, to stay, things like that are possible. So, of course, in an ideal, it's a question, and I agree, we have to ask. And most of more about the subject is because of this history of the creation of the country in 1960 and the referendum in 1961, and with the name of the Federal Republic of Cameroon, and then after just the Republic of Cameroon. So of course, all these things are normally in a democratic place, not only a democratic country, but in a democratic place, you have to ask regularly to people what do they want. But the moment is not, I believe, exactly the moment to organize a referendum. You have before to build a peace moment, and in this peace moment, you have to propose to people alternatives, but strong alternatives with something you can project your future if you are, of course, in southern Cameroon or elsewhere. And so you have to ask people. But if it is in a situation of violence and with this alternative, do you want to stay in this dictatorship or not? It is not exactly a fair referendum. Everybody wants to quit a dictatorship. You understand? And it won't be possible in this situation of dictatorship, because you can't think there will be a referendum organized in a place under the military power of a dictatorship. It's something I don't think it's possible. So yes, clearly to think we need to ask people at a moment what do they want. Yes, but before, I think there is a lot of very difficult steps to organize. And on this question of referendum and alternatives, that's where I think people of France has nothing to do. I don't know, and I don't want to say something if it's better separatism or not, things like that. It's not my question. My question is, there is a situation of incredible violence with all we can see clearly, and what can we do to stop this violence and to let people live a normal life? And of course, you need to organize collectively your normal life. So at this moment, it is stakeholders, political people from Cameroon who have the key. I talk with Maurice Kamto in different times. Of course, it's someone you have to ask about the future of Cameroon. You have people in jail from part of Anglophone country. It's incredible if you keep them in jail. You can't think you will have something positive to build a new life for people who are living in southern Cameroon at the moment. So there is a lot of things to do, I think, before, but you can, of course, think it's something, it's a goal to organize, to let people say what they want for their future. But I think the way is very complicated, and before we have a lot of obstacles.
Thank you very much, Honorable. I mean, you answered the question the way I wanted you to answer. Of course, referendums will always occur when the conditions are right, when people sit on the table and negotiate and come up with a peace agreement and define the way forward to make sure that there's durable peace and there's justice as well, because there can never be peace without justice. Thank you very much, Honorable Bergman and Honorable Nado, for sharing your thoughts and for taking part in this very committed engagement. And thank you for your engagement also to work with your colleagues and your government to push so that their policy towards this conflict can change for international mediation negotiations to occur so that the atrocities committed in the southern Cameroons can come to an end. Your commitment today gives hope to the refugees in Nigeria. The count currently is above 70,000. To those fleeing violence and ongoing massacres, and send a strong message to the Cameroon government that the international parliament, there's an international parliamentary movement that's building up to advocate for victims of abuses and also for perpetrators to be held to account. Thank you very much, Judith.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you once more, Honorable Kaufman, Honorable Nado, and Honorable Bergman. Thank you so much for taking your time out and joining us to share your insights and commitment. We are very grateful, and on behalf of the coalition, we thank you so much for this amazing discussion, and we will be certain that we engage with you going forward fully to make sure that we collaborate with your various parliaments. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are happy to introduce our next panel. We will now welcome our panelists who are experts on foreign policy and human rights to help us explore the salient aspects of Resolution 684 for ending the conflict and restoring peace and justice. So while we get the panelists ready and installed, please just take a few minutes break and we'll try to get things sorted in the background. Thank you so much again, and thanks for tuning in. I think everybody is settled. Kevin, I think all the panelists are in. Okay, so permit me to introduce the panelists. I'm honored to start with the introduction of Dr. Christopher Fomunyo. Dr. Chris Fomunyo is the Senior Associate for Africa and Regional Director for West and Central Africa at the National Democratic Institute. He has led international election observation missions and supervised democracy support programs in numerous African countries. Dr. Fomunyo works closely with political and civic leaders to advance inclusive democratic processes in the region. He also helped launch the African Statesman Initiative with former heads of state to facilitate political transition in Africa. Dr. Fomunyo is an adjunct faculty at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies and a former adjunct professor of African politics and government at Georgetown University. He also is the founder of a nonprofit organization that supports democracy and humanitarian causes in Cameroon. Dr. Fomunyo holds a licence en droit from Yaoundé University in Cameroon, a master's degree in international law from Harvard Law School, and a PhD in political science from Boston University. Thank you, Dr. Fomunyo, for accepting to join us. Henry?
Professor Chris Roberts is a foreign policy analyst and professor of political science teaching African politics and international relations in the Department of Political Science at the University of Calgary. He's the president of African Access Consulting. He was the director and vice president of the Canadian Council on Africa. His interests and areas of research are comparative politics, analyzing in African politics and development. He also conducts research on Canadian, American, and Chinese foreign policy in Africa, international relations theory, and global political economy, including security and strategic studies, specifically with military institutions in Africa, and the international dimensions influencing the evolution of post-colonial African states. He has conducted research trips to Africa, including one or more visits to Algeria, Burundi, Cote d'Ivoire, Gabon, Ghana, Kenya, Libya, Mauritius, Namibia, Nigeria, South Africa, Tanzania, Tunisia, and Zimbabwe. Welcome, Professor Roberts. We appreciate you joining us for this discussion. Judith?
I have the pleasure and honor to introduce Ms. Ifat Raban. She is a special representative for the African Bar Association regarding the humanitarian crisis in English-speaking Cameroon. Along with Cameroon, she currently works on Libya and worked on the Rohingya crisis for almost a decade. Prior to joining the African Bar Association, Ms. Raman was a visiting professional at the International Criminal Court and was based at the International Criminal Tribunals for Rwanda and for the former Yugoslavia, and was a civil party representative at the Khmer Rouge Tribunal and an operational desk officer at the UNHCR Malaysia. She holds a law degree from the City University of New York, a certificate of international law from Oxford University, and a BA in International Development Studies from McGill University. Ifat, it's my pleasure to welcome you. Henry?
Carrier Fox is a research assistant with the Holocaust Museum Center for the Prevention of Genocide, where she conducts research on strategies to prevent and mitigate mass atrocities. Previously, she served as program intern at the Center for Social Integrity, a Rohingya-led civil society organization in Bangladesh. From 2015 to 2018, Kyra was a communication specialist at the African Studies program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she oversaw communication strategy and assisted with the implementation of the Mandela Washington Fellowship for Youth African Leaders. Kyra is a senior fellow at Humanity in Action. She holds a BA in International Studies and Psychology with minor in African Studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where her thesis focused on the drivers of youth participation in mass atrocities. Thank you, Kyra, for joining us in this discussion. We will now allow panelists to make opening remarks before engaging in discussions to inform the policy direction of stakeholders within the international community, particularly the United Nations Security Council and the United Nations Human Rights Council, including the US government. We'll give 5 minutes each. We will start with Professor Roberts, and then we'll move to Ifat, Dr. Fomunyo, and lastly with Kyra. Professor Roberts, please, you have the floor.
You sure you want me to proceed, Dr. Fomunyo? I assumed he was going first, but that's okay. Just hopefully everybody can see my slides. I am going to go very briefly. I just have 5 slides that I wanted to show people. Judith, I assume I can see you. You can see the slides, right? Just shake your head. Thank you. Okay. I really appreciate the invitation to speak here today. I wanted to first acknowledge that the Senate resolution is from what I've seen so far in terms of any parliamentary, external parliamentary resolution, even if it doesn't have direct effects, it is the most comprehensive and in some ways the hardest hitting. And from a Canadian perspective, the fact that it's bipartisan and given the U.S. political situation at the moment is very impressive. So really appreciate the hard work that JT did as a staff member, but of all of the contributions made by people outside of the U.S. political system directly. So we know that the United Nations Security Council has not dealt effectively with the Cameroon crisis. It's had one informal meeting. It's had lots of other things going on behind the scenes, which I know some of our other panelists will talk about. But we do have this exact moment that we need to understand is a new moment in UN Security Council, given both new members. I've highlighted the newly elected members here, some of whom have been mentioned, including Kenya. But the fact that the United States will have a new UN ambassador who has extensive African experience. It also has a new administration, obviously, a new Secretary of State, and it will be the president of the UN Security Council in March. So there is a way to maybe build on the momentum of the Senate resolution coming up to next month. So I just wanted to lay that out for the people that might not understand how the United Nations or the Security Council works. The president gets to help to set the agenda, but can't absolutely set the agenda, but does have a bully pulpit of the presidency. But here's what I just want to just very briefly talk about what, again, people might not agree with this interpretation, but this is how I see as an external person looking at the crisis from the point of view of a Canadian, is the Cameroon hardliners in the regime, and I'm separating out, the regime is not all hardliners. So we have to be careful. There's a lot of Cameroonians in Francophone speaking areas that aren't happy with the status quo. And we know that through elections. We know that through not just in terms of the opposition politicians, but even people within the CPDM regime who are not happy with the current strategy. So we have to be aware of that as external forces. So let's just external observers. So there's a two-pronged strategy. I'm not going to go into all the details. Most of the people on the call are aware of these initiatives. But on one hand, there is this effort which has largely worked to placate the international community, to convince them that the government is actually making significant reforms to try and solve the crisis. From my point of view, they are superficial. Others might see that there's maybe more things going on, but I think they're pretty superficial. And at the same time, there's more and more evidence that the government has doubled down on the military option since 2017, 2018. So that's a problem. And that's what the international community has to be aware of in terms of what initiatives it might take coming up. So is there any sign yet of external influence to change the hardliner strategy in Cameroon? No, and the Senate resolution absolutely identifies that. And yet maybe is not going far enough in terms of acknowledging the international relations exercise, and the public international relations exercise, public relations exercise the government is doing with the national dialogue, the bilingualism commission, etc. But it does open the door to this notion of targeted, not sanctions against the entire government, targeted personal sanctions. They could be travel related, they could be financial related, they could even be in terms of promoting, supporting criminal investigations, whether that's domestically or through international fora. So that's all true. But if we look at all the things that even the United States did, and one of the few things you can say about the Trump administration is that it actually did a little bit on Cameroon. The AGOA eligibility withdrawal, the reduction of US security assistance, those were real things, and yet the actual impact were more token than real. And so that is something that the people that are thinking about next steps that the United States should do itself, as well as part of a multilateral effort, need to consider. So the one thing I think, the two things I think that I really want to focus on here is the impact of bilateral and international financial flows that ostensibly are there for economic development, reconstruction, or COVID relief over the last 4 years when Cameroon is experiencing an economic crisis, and either the direct or indirect use of some of that assistance to pursue the military option. And I think if we don't understand how that works, both the direct and the indirect, helping with COVID and helping with reconstruction and helping with humanitarian relief, in fact, can either open the doors to the government still putting some resources of its scarce resources in the military side, or effectively ignoring some of the external efforts that are trying to create the momentum towards a real mediated or negotiated solution, which really still isn't there yet. And the only thing I want to put on the table in here is that the government now, looking at 2021 with increasing oil prices, increasing natural gas prices, and better commodity wood prices, et cetera, the government, which was in a much tighter situation from 2017 to 2020, is actually looking at 2021, probably looking at a better economic space, which actually gives it more flexibility to pursue the military option. So that's something that all external actors need to be aware of. So one example of the evidence of the military option being the primary motivation of the government and not all of the political options is, one example I'll show through two photos, is the Bamenda Airport, which is, of course, in Northwest Province or Northwest region. And in February 2018, it had already had a military base. It was already used as a military air base for helicopters. So that's not new. But from February 2018, when a new military command was established for Northwest region, to mid-2020, the amount of money that was poured into this airport for redevelopment of military aspects, not civilian, not supporting Cam Air, but for military aspects, were extensive. And that's just one of the many examples of the military option being the primary option, that money in a cash-strapped government was being used to do things purely for the security elements, not for the, not really in terms of pushing along the economic or development or political agenda. And so the one thing that the Senate resolution misses for me as a Canadian is it talks about many other countries and multilateral organizations and never mentions Canada. And Canada always gets a free pass. And for many of us in Canada, that's very frustrating because Canada shouldn't get a free pass, and Canada is not just a minor bit player. It could be part of multilateral as well as bilateral efforts. And this is just an example of military equipment that is currently being used by the Cameroon Security Forces, which has a pedigree that includes both Canadian and American contributions, manufacturers, equipment. And you can see that aviation, as well as recently, Canada has been supplying armored personnel. Well, we have evidence that a company in Toronto has been selling new armored personnel carriers to Cameroon as of 2020, goes against everything that Canada is saying about supporting peaceful efforts in Cameroon. So many of us many of us in Canada have been actually going through the parliamentary route of writing petitions to the Parliament. And when you write a petition in Canada and it gets presented by a member of Parliament, the government has to respond. So I think there's probably things that people could do across different countries in terms of how your parliamentary system works. But this is one way to get the government to actually respond on the record to what it's doing. So this is what we did last year. And this was the response that we got, which is full of a lot of simple language and things that they're doing. But if you look at it carefully, it basically says that the government has been urging the Cameroon government to do better. The Canadian government has been urging we're offering to assist the Cameroon government with whatever it needs. And that is not going to go very far in terms of leveraging key players in the Cameroon regime to actually go to a negotiating table. There is nothing that Canada is doing so far that lend support to that, including even the funding of the Swiss-led process. Much of that money is coming from Canada, which is not widely known. So what's missing? This is my last slide. What's missing in Senate Resolution 684? Not that there needs to be another resolution, but just things to consider. The explicit support for international fact-finding missions or investigations, which need to be concurrent with any kind of call for a ceasefire. And the one that I really want to focus on here is this is the multilateral flows that have continued to the Cameroon government from the IMF and the World Bank from 2017 to 2020 kept that government afloat when the oil prices were down and the government was in tough fiscal shape. And yet it was still able to buy new weapons from around the world. You know, in the arms business, you can't really borrow money to buy that stuff. You have to pay cash. So that has been problematic. It's been able to buy, you know, from China and from Europe, from NATO partners, as well as now we know Canada and the United States, extra military equipment during this crisis when it was under an IMF emergency package. So the United States is a major shareholder, Canada as a major shareholder, France, Germany, Japan, UK as major shareholders of these organizations need to be aware that the money that is going through IMF and World Bank programs directly or indirectly facilitates the government being able to use some of its scarce hard currency for military purchases. So I'm just going to leave it there, and just for things to people to think about as we go forward.
If I
Hi, can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I guess it's my third panel with the organization, so I'm very honored to be invited back to speak. So I think a lot of the stuff I was going to say, a lot of people already addressed it. I don't know if you know, but I did as Dr. Roberts said, informal session at the Security Council. So I did brief the council members on that. So just a lot of it, I was wondering if Dr. Roberts was speaking to me or the governments themselves. Having been briefing the council members on a confidential basis for the last God knows how many years, I think it has been, it had his ups and downs, and I'm very thankful to the council members for giving me the time. I'm very thankful to South Africa also for giving me the time to brief them on various issues on Cameroon. I believe our colleagues with the Kenyan government also paying attention. I believe my wonderful colleague was actually at the Aria Formula meeting from Kenya to be there to observe what was going on, what was being said. So yeah, we've also been, I guess, in touch with the African Union regarding the Cameroonian crisis. So my point is that I think, and I've been working very closely with some of the panelists, and it's been such a big pleasure. Believe it or not, I've actually told a few of my Libyan colleagues that I'm going to be speaking on Cameroon, and they say, can they tune in to hear what's going on in Cameroon? So, like, you know, outside of even just the UN body, I've been speaking to a lot of folks, a lot of government officials regarding the crisis. So I've been asked to speak regarding the UN. So I've been working, I guess, behind the scene with the council members, but also the other things that, you know, I'm so happy to see that the US had agreed to join the Human Rights Council, because for us, that's a very big important. And as you know, I've worked on the Rohingya crisis for a long time, and this is where Karen and I can, you know, come in together, I guess, because we know there are things that happened in terms of how a fact-finding mission can take place. You know, and our colleagues and I guess our common friend briefed us quite a bit on how to do a fact-finding mission, you know, and regarding whether go through UNGA or go through Human Rights Council. And if you notice, if you're following what's happening in Libya, they just last year, I believe they actually agreed to have a fact-finding mission. And what happened, the entire council came together and they said, you know what, let's do this. So this is something that the United States can take a lead at the Human Rights Council. You know, I don't know if we need another Senate resolution or a House resolution, but this is something that Blinken can ask the State Department to, you know, ask their ambassador in Geneva to say, you know what, let's do this fact-finding mission for Cameroon. And the other thing that I've been, you know, working on, or rather worked on, was meeting members of the Peace Building Commission, which serves to assist the Human Security Council with this agenda. So now, you know, Seb spoke about putting Cameroon on the Security Council's agenda. I am not so sure if many governments will agree, because you do need 9 votes. And that may be a bit difficult, but if given the fact that you have a different government now in the U.S. Administration, it may work, it may not. But for me, I'm more interested in actually finding, I guess, venue for assist with the peace talk. And I think my message for today would be actually for the United States to ask France and the African Union to come together and lead the peace talk. And you know, and regarding Dr. Roberts' point on Canada, I am, you know, I've met with various governments. I've met with, you know, over 25, maybe 30 now. God knows, I lost count. So, you know, so I'm not here to bring in the Canadian perspective. I'm here to ask, I guess, the U.S. government to ask France and ask the African Union to come in together and ask for a peace talk. And I understand that our government's policies, the Canadian, are to push for the Swiss peace talk. But my point, you know, then this is where I push back. If the Swiss peace talk was very successful, then why is this crisis still ongoing? So I'm here to ask governments to move away from the Swiss peace talk and ask the United States actually to lead the peace talk. Ask the United States to come together, as I believe was JD talked about holistic approach. So here's your holistic approach. Ask the United States, France and the African Union to come together and start a peace talk. And it has happened before, we've seen it. Regarding a fact-finding mission, I think the United States can lead. We've worked on that behind the scene also, to have the United States lead at UNGA, but now the fact that US is back again on the Human Rights Council, this is something they can be very effective. This is where Canada can come in and join in process, ask other countries. I mean, when I reached out to our government, they said, I believe they said, you know, with 34 countries, they put out a statement on Cameroon. So ask those 34 countries to come together and have a fact-finding resolution at the Human Rights Council. In terms of their other venues available, right? If you want to address the crisis with the Peace Building Commission, that is really there for the kinds of crises that you're seeing in Cameroon. But the issue is that the government themselves have to bring the country to the commission and say, you know what, we need help. What the commission does is basically doesn't chastise being on the Security Council's agenda, but it says, you know, we're here, help us build peace, help us find a solution. And Canada is a member, so Canada was the chair for the Peace Building Commission. It's a very powerful organization, very, very powerful, and it is there to help the Security Council. And I think this is where I think Canada could have engaged, but you saw that you know, there was no engagement on this. I don't know if we're the vice chair right now for Peace Building Commission, but you know, this is where Canada can engage also. You'll see all the Security Council members are present. A lot of the other members are present. African members are present there. Then you have Asian countries, South American countries are also present. So you have, I forget how many, like maybe 40 countries there to assist a country with getting peace or bringing peace to the table. Regarding the UN, so listen, I don't want Stefan to come and say, you know what, how dare you speak on behalf of the UN? But the UN said that they're available to assist in finding peace, right? They made the announcement, they allocated money from Peace Building Commission to address the crisis in Cameroon. But the government, our issue has been the government won't come to the table. And this is where our friend from South Africa was talking about sanctions. We're not asking for countrywide sanctions. We're not trying to target the entire population. What we're saying is target the people we know who need to be sanctioned, to show the world that, you know, the US means business, that let's bring peace to the table. Come to the table or we'll sanction you. And this is where the targeted sanctions, these are smart targeted sanctions. We have GloMag sanctions that we've seen that I mean, if you're looking what's happening in Burma, the Biden administration just came out and said, you know, we're going to sanction these folks. You know, and they've done it. They're showing the US means business to bring peace to the table. And then you see something else that the Biden administration keeps saying, Americans back. Well, you know what, Americans, show us that you're back by bringing Cameroon to the table, by showing that you mean business, by putting out these targeted, smart targeted sanctions, individual targeted sanctions, right? And this is where I think, you know, hopefully our lovely colleague Kyra will help us, you know, with the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum to reach out to your friends at the State Department, you know, and ask, you know, and members of Congress saying, you know what, there's something going on in Cameroon. It's been more than 4 years. We have to do something about this. And this is where, you know, all the advocacy behind the scene up front, we need help. And with the UN, yes, of course, you know, UN will be there to assist. If the United States said, you know, we're going to lead this peace talk with France and the African Union, you know, I'm 100% sure the UN will say, yes, let's do this.
Thank you, Ifat, for setting the stage for Kyra to make her opening remarks. Kyra, please.
Thank you so much, Henry, and thank you to CDN for organizing this panel and for highlighting this new resolution and spotlighting this crisis that has been plaguing Cameroonians for 4 years now. And I'm really honored to be on such an esteemed panel. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum is relatively new to research and policy work on Cameroon. And so I really thank a lot of the individuals who are on this call for helping us to gain a better understanding of the crisis and where our efforts and voice can contribute to ending it. So just to start with a brief introduction to the museum and to the Center for the Prevention of Genocide. The Holocaust Museum teaches that the Holocaust was preventable and that by heeding warning signs and taking early action, individuals and governments can save lives. So with this knowledge, the Simon Scott Center for the Prevention of Genocide within the museum works to do for victims of genocide today what the world failed to do for the Jews of Europe in the 1930s and 1940s. So the center aims to alert the US national conscience, influence policymakers, and stimulate worldwide action to prevent and work to halt genocide and mass atrocities. So we work on a select number of cases that are either experiencing mass atrocities or at risk of experiencing mass atrocities. And we define mass atrocities as large-scale, widespread violence against civilians. So we began work on Cameroon's Anglophone crisis just over a year ago because of the ongoing atrocities that we witnessed against Anglophone civilians by security forces and separatist groups, and because of the risk that these atrocities could escalate to a more massive scale. So mass atrocities are rare, but that's why our center does its work, why it's so important to anticipate worst case scenarios, potential escalation, and then take concrete actions to prevent these things from happening. So that's why we're so grateful to see this resolution and for some of its more forward-leaning recommendations on atrocity prevention. So what I want to do today, I know many of you are fully aware of the dynamics of the Anglophone crisis. So what I'm hoping to do is highlight some developments in the crisis, some recent developments that we're hearing from our partners that are fueling the risk of further atrocities. And then I want to highlight how the recommendations in the resolution address some of these developments, particularly in its recommendations to the US and other actors. So at this stage in the Anglophone crisis, we're seeing a regular pattern of low-level violence, which occurs on almost a daily basis, and then punctuated by these large-scale, really horrific massacres every few months, like what we've seen in Garbu, Kumba, and more recently, Mautu. Worryingly, abuses by separatists and security forces have been reportedly on the rise over the past year, and especially recently since December of 2020. Both security forces and armed separatists are increasingly targeting moderate civilians whom they perceive as associated with the other side. And because of issues like weaker command structures on both sides of the conflict, as well as a lack of oversight of security force, civilian oversight of security forces, we're seeing more extreme attacks. And we're also seeing both sides of the conflict continue to incite violence and use hate speech on social media. So on the government side, we're seeing security forces becoming increasingly emboldened by a sense of impunity and more brazen in their attacks on civilians, as we saw in the recent massacres in Ngarbu and Mautu. And as the crisis persists and security forces are not held accountable, we're seeing increasingly brutal attacks on civilians, including reportedly attacking former safe havens, hospitals, health facilities, and palaces of traditional leaders. And as security forces continue to act with impunity, this just allows further crimes to persist. Meanwhile, on the separatist side, we're seeing the movement fracturing, with some factions committing more extreme violence than previously. And a fractured movement makes pursuing a ceasefire or peace agreement more difficult. We also see separatist groups becoming better equipped and trained, reportedly capturing more sophisticated weapons, producing homemade bombs and IEDs, and possibly projecting force outside of the Anglophone regions. With better equipment, training, and funding, separatist attacks will likely become more strategic and inflict greater damage on both civilians and security forces, which could lead security forces to double down and increase attacks on separatists and civilians. And most worryingly, neither side appears willing to make the concessions necessary for a political solution. And I say this all to just remind us that as long as the crisis continues, civilians will continue to be at risk, and that it is really important to think of these ways that the crisis could change so that we can intervene now and as soon as possible to prevent it from escalating any further and from putting any more civilians at risk. So there are several steps that the Cameroonian government, separatist groups, and other governments, including the US, can take to address the Anglophone crisis and prevent further atrocities. So here at the Simon Scott Center, we talk about a couple of different types of atrocity prevention. We talk about structural prevention, which addresses the root cause of violence, the root causes of a conflict. We talk about operational prevention, which prevents or dissuades certain actors from committing atrocities. And then we talk about systemic prevention, which includes supporting and reinforcing the international mechanisms and norms against atrocities. And so in the Senate resolution, we actually see recommendations that highlight all three of these types of prevention. First, on structural prevention, the resolution recommends that the government address the root causes of the violence and address the legitimacy of Anglophone concerns, which we see as a really critical path to ultimately resolving the crisis and preventing it from recurring. Second, on the operational prevention side, so actions that actively prevent perpetrators from committing atrocities, a couple of really important recommendations: an immediate ceasefire and pursuing an inclusive dialogue that could include the use of an independent mediator. We also really highlight and commend the recommendations for credible and transparent investigations into all human rights abuses. At the Simon Scott Center, we really believe that justice and accountability are essential to preventing future mass atrocities by resolving the grievances that drive atrocities in the first place. So this includes independent investigations, as well as holding perpetrators on both sides of the crisis responsible. Finally, in terms of what the US can do, a couple of recommendations put forward in the resolution: targeted sanctions against perpetrators of atrocities and human rights violations on both sides of the crisis are really critical to the assistance to ensure that it's not supporting any sort of human rights abuses. And we've seen the US take both of these actions in the past, either in Cameroon or in previous crises. And then lastly, the resolution kind of highlights the necessity of systemic prevention, so working through international fora to address the crisis. There's a number of ways that the US could do this, for example, by establishing a formal investigation into the commission of atrocities in Cameroon through the UN Security Council, General Assembly, Human Rights Council, or Secretary General, or by calling for a special rapporteur for human rights in Cameroon through the UN. And this idea of systemic prevention is really critical to making sure that our international system doesn't tolerate atrocities like this, like what we see in Cameroon, as well as what we see in other crises around the world. And so overall, we are really excited to see the resolution addressing several of the risk factors and developments that are fueling atrocities in Cameroon. And we're looking forward to concrete action from the US and other governments to prevent further atrocities. So with that, I really thank you for the opportunity to speak and look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Robert, Ifat, and Kyra. Just that Dr. Fomoyo is also a member of the advisory board of the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiation, and he provides critical insights and guidance on how the coalition engages with different stakeholders within the international community. Dr. Fomoyo, please, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Henry, for those very kind words. And thank you, Judith, for co-moderating this session with Henry and everyone within CDN that has worked so hard to put together this webinar and this opportunity, this platform for us to brainstorm about how to make the most use of a wonderful resolution in the Senate Resolution 684. Let me also just thank all of the panelists, all of the people who made themselves available to share their expertise and their experience, especially on a Saturday, when we know you could have been doing a lot of other things for yourselves. But the fact that you were willing to make the time to talk about Cameroon and this conflict and what it means and the way forward really means a lot to us. We're very touched by your presence. I want to give a special salute to the elected officials amongst us, Honorable Nadeau from France, who really, you're standing out almost as a voice in the wilderness, in territory that is almost hostile to the cause that we all are committed to. But that has not discouraged you, and you continue to speak out in France, across Europe, and we're very elated. You've even made interviews with local media outlets in Cameroon, to reassure the people of Cameroon that not everyone in France is blind to the plight of our people. And it touches us very deeply, and we're very grateful and very appreciative. I also want to give a shout out to Honorable Darren Beckman for participating and for taking on the commitment to send a special letter to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Africa. South Africa has a history that puts it in a unique position on the African continent. Many of us appreciate the conversations that we can have with South Africans, but many of us also hope and wish and really want for South Africa to do more. And I'll come back to that later on. But when a member of parliament takes the commitment to write officially to the foreign minister to express his concerns, I think that we begin to see the type of movement that is needed across the African continent. These conversations are not the most easy of conversations. They're extremely difficult conversations. And Judith did well for us to start with a minute of silence in memory of all of the people that have lost their lives, because we're an anniversary away from what happened in Gabon. And we all remember when Gabon happened, we had all the condemnations and all the criticisms and all the declarations, and we all thought that would be the end of it. But look at what has happened to our people since Gabon. We've had Kumba, we've had Matu, we've had Muyuka, we've had Boya, we've even had Meta quarters in Bamenda just a few days ago. People are being killed on a daily basis, and it makes for a very hard conversation. Unfortunately for us, in some ways, here comes a resolution that gives us something to work with. And I really want to take this moment to thank the senators who worked on this, Chairman Rich, Senator Ben Cardin, and all of the senators who came from both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, to work collaboratively and collectively to get this resolution out on January 1, 2021. It's very comprehensive. It really brings to the fore various contours of the crisis and provides openings, avenues for people who are well-intentioned to be able to work to bring an end to this crisis and to find a peaceful resolution of the root causes of the grievances and the conflict. I want to give a special shout out to my friend and former colleague, JT, because we know the work that goes into something like this. Yes, the legislators eventually come out and take a vote or make their positions known, but it's the staff that does all the heavy lifting. And the fact that JT and his colleagues on the Hill, on Capitol Hill, work tirelessly on this resolution explains why we have such a wonderful instrument to work with, why we have such a resolution that the entire world, we're now beginning to hear legislators in France, in the UK, in Germany, and hopefully soon across the African continent, make reference to this Senate Resolution 684 and begin to work to find ways to emulate or also to put their voices out there in support of some of the measures that are defined in this resolution. Very briefly, there are three things that I want to highlight that my colleagues haven't yet touched on, which I hope would just add to the conversation as we look to the way towards the way forward in terms of what do we do with this resolution now that it's out there and provides some avenues. The first point that stands out for me is the fact that this resolution 684 cross-references the UN Security Council resolution 2532, which was the resolution that asked for a COVID-19 ceasefire around the world. And that for me is a reminder that that UN Security Council resolution 2532 was not respected in Cameroon. That the government forces continue to commit massacres and atrocities as if that resolution hadn't been taken by the UN Security Council. And we also continue to see atrocities by some of the armed groups. If that serves any purpose, it should be a reminder to all of us on this call and to all of the partners that we speak with that there is no chance that as we all fear about the second wave of COVID-19 across Africa, including in Cameroon, that if we don't take concrete steps to implement some of the recommendations in resolution 684, that the actors are still going to behave the same way that they behaved through all of 2020, and we're still going to have the same killings and atrocities that we experienced in 2020. The second thing that stands out for me in this resolution that has not yet been touched upon is the fact that this resolution specifically highlights the fact that there's a significant population of the Cameroonian diaspora resident in the United States. And I want to applaud that diaspora for their advocacy work because it's borne fruit. And I've always said that, yes, despite the criticism that's levied against some members of the diaspora, sometimes for good reason, the diaspora is probably the one entity that has stood between armed forces and more killings in southern Cameroon. And so, please, let's continue our advocacy work. Call your members of Congress, call your senators. And for those of you who are in states that may not give you access to your members of Congress, call your state representative, call your mayor. They may then know the governor, who knows the senator. Please, don't give up on that advocacy. There are a number of stars lining up for 2021 that would help or that portend favorably to us being able to impact on bringing an end to this conflict. Let's use all the levers that we have, all the relationships, continue your advocacy for us to bring an end to the killings and the atrocities. Thirdly, this resolution makes reference to the need for a strategic collective effort. These three words are in this resolution as a global appeal to development partners across the globe to work with the US in a strategic collective effort. I would therefore make an appeal that we go beyond the United States. I know that people in Europe are working extremely hard in Canada are working extremely hard, and a number of organizations afoot to draw the attention of policymakers to the plight of our people and what's happening in Cameroon. We have to multiply that effort, because I remember, some of us of my generation remember how apartheid was brought to an end in South Africa. It was through targeted sanctions. There were even broader sanctions. The sanctions worked. They crippled the apartheid regime, and they brought South Africans to the table to negotiate for a peaceful end to the apartheid regime in South Africa. Nothing should stop the world from rallying around the plight of people in Southern Cameroon to make sure that they can bring the pressure that's needed to get everybody around the table for us to seek and obtain a peaceful resolution of this crisis, and for the root causes of the grievances and the conflict to be addressed. With those 3 points, I would just like to make three other recommendations for all of us, Cameroonians and friends of Cameroon. We have to redouble our efforts, because we realize that with this resolution really raises the level of debate and discourse. And so we have to fine-tune our own skills in how we build relationships and build bridges, and stop trying to burn down bridges and burn down relationships, because that has crippled us in the past 2 or 3 years of this crisis. We have seen that people who were so friendly and so concerned about this crisis in 2016 and 2017, at some point just abandoned the cause, because they've been rubbed the wrong way. They've been mistaken for opponents or enemies of the cause, whereas they were actually people advocating for the cause. We have to learn afresh to rebuild those relationships, reestablish those relationships, build bridges with stakeholders who can have influence, so they can also weigh in their respective rights to make sure that this conflict can be brought to an end. Secondly, we have to avoid allowing ourselves to be sidetracked by distractions, by trying to knock down each other. If your compatriot makes a good point, agree with them, encourage them, find out how they got there, and then try to multiply that and leverage that. There is no need to spend time undercutting each other, because that's not going to lead us anywhere. In fact, JT made reference to this in his opening remarks when he said, if you all come to me or come to us with coherent messages, with one voice, then it makes it easier for us to discern what's in the best interest of our people and how to work to make that happen. My last point has to do with our advocacy on the African continent. We have to redouble our efforts to bring Africa into this discussion. The African Union has been a huge disappointment. It's been silent, but it's our regional organization, and we have no choice but to bring the African Union into this. The sub-regional organization, the Central Africa sub-regional organization, has been abysmal. It hasn't said a word about the conflict in Cameroon. Just next door to Cameroon, as an illustration, the Central African Republic has been in a crisis for the latter part of 2020, especially in December of 2020. The Central African heads of states immediately passed a resolution about a mediation process for the Central African Republic, about the need to appoint a mediator to bring all of the parties to the negotiations table. The Central African Republic is 5 million people at most, which is far less than the number of people that live in what is currently called the Northwest and Southwest regions of Cameroon, or the former British Southern Cameroon. And the population of that territory surpasses the population in a number of countries in the Central Africa sub-region: Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Congo, Brazzaville, you can name them. These countries do not have populations that equate the population of Southern Cameroon. And the question that we therefore ask is it because the fighting and the killings and the atrocities are taking place in the periphery? Would it be better if this fighting was taking place in the capital, so African countries could take notice and the world could take notice? Or is it because the minority population that's being slaughtered is Anglophone, a population that doesn't exist in any of the other countries in the Central Africa sub-region? The African countries at the United Nations have been helpful in conversations, but I will be the first to admit that some of the pushback, the hardest pushback that people have felt within the UN system in terms of countries not wanting to internationalize the conflict in the Northwest and Southwest regions or in former British Southern Cameroon has come from African countries. Just remember the statement that was read by Equatorial Guinea on behalf of the P3 countries when there was the IR Forum, an informal conversation about the crisis in Cameroon. We have to do more advocacy to sensitize our leaders to know that people are dying. Atrocities are being committed. And the more this crisis lasts, the more it's going to become the source of instability, because the next generation will not forget what happened to the English-speaking people of Cameroon. With that, I would like to end my remarks and would be delighted to respond to any questions that you may have. But once again, this is a very unique platform that CDN continues to provide to Cameroonians and friends of Cameroon and people who are seized by this crisis. And I can see that the deliberations have been very enriching. And I hope that as we leave from here, we'll continue with the battle, the mantle that we've all taken to raise awareness about this conflict and to do all we can in our power to work as hard as we can to bring the conflict to an end and to make sure the root causes are addressed. So thank you very much, Judith and Henry, for this opportunity to speak on this panel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fomunyo, and to all the panelists who have spoken. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and be with us. And your opening remarks leads us to some tough questions. And thank you for the preparation. Dr. Fomunyo, I will start with you. Today, we are here today. We will not have been talking about all of this if the US had not taken the lead to do this resolution and pass it in the Senate. So they have led us in that arena. You are a strong advocate for mediated negotiations, which aligns with the resolution. But Cameroon has taken the military option. What needs to be done to bring the regime to submit to mediated negotiations, and how can the US lead in this? And when we say lead, it's not talk anymore. How can the US lead with action in this? We know you have a lot of tentacles in the capital. We have a lot of tentacles in the government, and especially the new administration. How are you going to ask the new US government to be able to get the regime to the table?
Well, I think that so far, I mean, the new administration is barely 2 or 3 weeks in office, but so far, I think the signs that have come out of the new administration are positive signs. The fact that President Joe Biden spoke to the African Union on the eve of the summit and said, we want to work with you. We want to make sure the rights of people everywhere are being respected. It was reopening that gate for a two-way conversation between the administration and the regional entity. I think the fact that Secretary Blinken, unprompted during his confirmation hearings, specifically raised the case of Cameroon, is a matter of grave concern. It's a very positive sign. And when you look at some of the other high-profile individuals who are getting into positions of power and influence, who are very knowledgeable about this crisis and the plight of our people, there's reason to be optimistic that this administration will probably have a greater impact and provide more leadership than we've seen in the past. I think that the administration has to be very frank in terms of putting all its instruments or all of its tools on the table, both the carrots for the good actors and the sticks for the negative forces. That I am all in favor of targeted sanctions, because that's a very strong way of sending a firm message that the atrocities are being recorded and that perpetrators will be held accountable for it. We've seen targeted sanctions work in a lot of countries. Henry talked about them at the beginning. There's no need to repeat them. I think that if targeted sanctions are adopted and made public, it would send a very strong signal that the US and the rest of the international community mean business when they say that the military option cannot work and that people will be held accountable. And that can then become an incentive for people to rally around the table. I think the US can also lead in finding ways to provide very meaningful options for negotiations. I would be hesitant to take the Swiss talks off the table without an alternative. And I think the sequencing has to be right, because the last thing you need is to undermine something and not replace it with an alternative. And everybody said, if that existed, maybe we could force everybody to it. Can that be beefed up? Yes, it can be beefed up by having a Swiss +2 or +3 other mediators around to provide it more legitimacy and make it more attractive for everybody to come to the table. But in a nutshell, I think the administration has to be willing to use all of the tools at their disposal to make sure they can bring the parties to the table and seek a negotiated solution.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fomuyo. I think you echoed some very important issues about ongoing efforts. I think the need is for US to engage more forcefully in every effort, not just with ongoing efforts with the Swiss, but also with UNHCR, the United Nations Human Rights Council and all of that, so that Cameroon the government can be under very immense pressure for them to get to the negotiation table. Professor Roberts, you have shared very important insights on the conflict dynamics. We understand you have a good mastery of the economics of the civil war and the implication of France and other countries. You followed the remarks by Dr. Fomuyo. How long can the Biya regime sustain funding for this war, and what would be the implication on the human rights as the regime insists on a military solution without international intervention?
Well, I'm going to be frank, and I'm going to say, unfortunately, given what we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years, and if nothing changes, this government can maintain this level of operational military security tempo indefinitely. And that's why I've tried to focus on where is the Cameroon government, given its significant fiscal crisis that it's been facing since before this crisis started, but just before, how has it been able to maintain the level of military purchases, not just security assistance that it was getting from various countries, in especially starting 2014, 2015 to deal with Boko Haram. It's been able to increase the overall sizes of the military in terms of increasing particularly the size of the BIR, that military force. It's purchased, and again, it has to be hard currency. It's purchased additional helicopters. It's purchased additional armored vehicles from the United Arab Emirates, many other places. It's purchasing ammunitions that it uses consistently from places like China, but also NATO countries. And given how the country was in such a crisis in 2017, 2018, 2019, that the IMF had to step in with a $666 million emergency package to basically float the macroeconomic system of the country. Without that additional, just that major addition that helps to increase the foreign currency ability of governments and the banking system locally, without that, the country might have had to take a different approach than the military option. So we can talk about all of these targeted sanctions for individuals, but if the government is getting continue financial flows through the IFIs, can sometimes go, as our MP from South Africa said, to alternative sources, there is no end to this. And I'm just going to, and my concern now is that the economic fiscal situation of the government, not of the country, the average person is still going to suffer. But as the government, let's say, oil flows more through the Chad-Cameroon pipeline, and the government gets a certain amount for every barrel that flows through there. The government gets some funding from oil, some funding from natural gas, which is growing. It doesn't necessarily, won't be as dependent on the international financial institutions to be able to maintain a certain level of military operations on an almost permanent basis, because it is effectively it's written off the far north to let basically Nigeria deal with it. And it's focusing much of the equipment that it had deployed in 2014, 2015, 2016 in the far north has been redeployed to the south. So there is no end in sight unless something changes on the international financial front. And that's the bad news for me.
Thank you so much, Professor Roberts. And I hear you, and I think we all hear you and understand the challenges of that dynamic. Because like you say, every day we go online and you see one of these organizations has given a loan or has given some form of aid again to the government. And it beggars belief that with what is currently going on, there is still that flow of cash. So I think it's all on us, incumbent on us to pressure our various governments who are part of those organizations to find a way of stopping that flow of cash. Thank you so much for those remarks. Ifat, I'll come to you. Bearing in mind what Dr. Roberts has just said and how we look at organizations like the AU, Biden says he wants to work with the AU to address the conflict. But you and I know, and as everybody has said here already, the AU has not been fully engaged. It wasn't engaged in Gambia, in Ethiopia, in Western Sahara and other countries. In fact, they don't get engaged. I guess they are looking out for each other. What would you expect Secretary Blinken to do if the AU is to remain inactive? While I don't want to call numbers, as some people know, when I start going into numbers, I become very emotional. What would you expect Secretary Blinken to do if AU remains inactive and women, children continue to be massacred in what some papers like The Guardian are now calling a genocide? How would you get the US, the Secretary of State, to pressure the AU and other people to work? I mean, we cannot say more than it's already happening. So what's your take on that?
Look, pressure works, right? Pressure works, and what I mean by that, we saw that Faki Musa did go to Cameroon, but he just didn't appear in Cameroon for the hell of it. The pressure came from somewhere, and the pressure came from the United States, Great Britain. You had other countries coming to the AU saying, do something. You have to do something, right? And when we have like Security Council resolutions that have been championed by the A3 at the Security Council, right? Such as like silence the guns. So how does this conflict any different from what the AU wants to achieve? Those things will work. Pressure works. Pressure works. I mean, the council members pressured the African Union, and Faki Musa went. Whether or not it was impactful, that's different. What I'm saying right now is not that the AU will remain silent or will remain inactive. I think that if you have African countries who are sitting on at the council and they pressure the African Union to do something, I think it will work. With this, it's just a barrier. We just have to keep pushing. On that note, I do want to thank the South African ambassador for joining us and listening in to address the crisis, because South Africa is part of this African Union. And I do believe South Africa has a role to play, even though they left me behind on the Security Council. They can do something. I mean, this is an Anglophone crisis, right? This has to be dear to South Africa. South Africa has gone through so many issues that Dr. Fominio has raised. So this is not something new for South Africa, and this could be, and JT, I'm hoping JT is also listening in, like this is something bilateral thing that the United States can do with South Africa. Say, you know what, South Africa, can you please raise this issue at the African Union? And this could be something that the South African MP raised, trade, it's like you give good and then you take some back, so this could be something that positive that the South Africa and the United States can work together. And we saw that Tony Blinken did call South Africa before he made phone calls to the UAE or Saudi Arabia. And that should signal something that the United States is serious about, reaching out to African countries. And for me, that was such a blessing just to see that, he actually did reach out to South Africa first. And it matters because people like me do believe in South Africa. We believe that South Africa can play a positive role. In terms of what Dr. Fominio said, the A3 statement that was given by Equatorial Guinea, there was just so much politics happening behind the scene. But we also have to be mindful of the fact that South Africa did say we need global ceasefire on Cameroon. They called for ceasefire at the Security Council for Cameroon. Whether or not that was respected by the Cameroonian government, that is something South Africa can raise with Cameroon. Say, hey, listen, we asked for a ceasefire in Cameroon, but you didn't respect that. This is something South African can also absolutely raise at the African Union. But pressure works. Pressure, we've seen it. I mean, I believe African Union is ready to engage with the United States and other partners, right? And you need Africa to resolve this issue. And I say this because, if you have friends in the United States coming together to resolve this issue, it's a bit colonial, no? Whereas, like, if you have African Union saying, what I mean by, if African Union members are listening in, like, other than, it's, you need an African voice to say we can solve our own issues. If African solutions are needed for African problems, show us that you can do this. Show us when we go at the Security Council that you can address these crises on your own. And then, and the Security Council backed every, when the African Union says, we should do this, Security Council comes in and says, we're going to empower you. And they've done it, right? They said, we are going to empower you to solve this crisis. Whatever aid you need, the United Nations said the same thing. Whatever assistance you need from the UN is ready and is standing by to assist. If we have African Union, and I am going to be positive, that we can break this barrier to African Union. And and we've done quite a bit of advocacy, and I'm hoping that the African Union at this point recognizes the fact that it hasn't gone, this crisis hasn't ended yet, right? And we need to do something about this. So we have to keep pushing, and I'm so happy to see our, unfortunately, the colleague from Kenya wasn't there, but I know for a fact Kenya is paying attention, right? Kenya is part of the Security Council. They replaced South Africa, so they have to carry on the torch to address this crisis, right? And regarding the Security Council, you have to understand also the dynamic of the Security Council. You have 70% of countries on the Council's agenda are African countries, right? So Council members tend to push back. And then you have and if there's like this thing that, because there's sometimes conflicts are like, well, there's this in Africa, the pushback is like this East versus the West, like China versus the United States coming together and pushing, and I'm like, and I almost want to say like, well, I'm Asian, here I am, like, I will be involved, let's end the crisis, but I am going to keep pushing. I believe that we have to engage with the African Union, and we've seen it. Pressure works. And unfortunately, sometimes the discussions happen at the Security Council, and people are not paying attention, right? You don't need the country to be on the agenda to be addressed, right? And when I say this, there's so many venues, right? Security Council adopted various resolutions. and they have discussions. So, you know, you have the new ambassador coming in, you know, she can absolutely raise it, right? And then reach out to her counterpartner in New York, say, you know, African Union, let's do this. Like, what do you need from us? And something else that the South African MP raised, you know, like in terms of trade, and I'm on board with them. I have to say the United States and Canada and I can't speak for Europe, but need to see Africa as a partner. And I believe as soon as we start seeing Africa as a partner, and this is something that we should be telling African Union, listen, we're not here to lecture you. We're here to work with you as a partner to address this crisis. And France, of course, has to come in. So I want to be positive. I believe that we can push it. We can keep going, you know, and I can see the fact that you had people from other places to come in and, you know, discuss from African continent coming and discuss the crisis. I think this breaks the barrier. And also something else that the United States can do with these African countries, provide intel. Provide intel, because you have to understand a lot of these African countries do not have the intels to address some of these crises. So sometimes what he said, the MP said, basically is just like, well, it's far from us, right? So you have to keep engaging and keep engaging and keep engaging, but you have to tell them, like, this is what's happening. We, the P5, know what's happening. We have the information. We have the intel. But sometimes you have countries like Niger on the council, right? To, you know, they may not have the intel on what else is happening. And so you have to keep engaging the African countries on an individual level and have them request the African Union to do something. So there's so many things happening, but for me, you have to keep pushing.
Thank you very much, Ifat. We know there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of engagement in the question and answer forum. Kyra, your work to prevent mass atrocities is very relevant in this discussion. Peter Zongo of The Guardian, in his article in May 30th, 2018, referred to the massacres in the southern Cameroon as a genocide. Professor Roberts just gave a correlation between funding and atrocities, and he actually said that the funding stream from external sources remains untouched. It's still ongoing. Do you agree with the characterization of what is going on in the southern Cameroon as a genocide? You have seen the reports of the massacres in 2020, some of the massacres, especially the Nkabu, the Kumba massacre, and also the massacres in January 2021 alone. Does it meet the bar that requires a United Nations Human Rights Council's intervention for investigation? How can your center, what can your center do to make these investigations happen? Because of course you did mention that these investigations are key to deter a culture of impunity.
Thanks, Henry, for that really provocative question. So as a center, we rarely, have the legal analysis to make a genocide determination on our own. And this is a very kind of politically complicated concept. So what I can say is that we have not done our own kind of legal analysis of the situation. So I can't, tell you whether it would meet the threshold for a genocide or not. What we can say is that we're extremely concerned about the ongoing atrocities. And, there's a lot of discussion in the international community, important designation. But what I would encourage everyone to remember is that, legal terms about what a crisis is or is not should not, encourage or prevent anyone from taking the action to stop any sort of ongoing violations of human rights and atrocities and violence against civilians. So I would really encourage us to remember that. And then what I would say is so critical and necessary in Cameroon's Anglophone crisis is that we have a lack of numbers and proper monitoring to understand what is going on the ground. So it makes it really difficult for international observers, for legal observers, for others to make designations about this crisis. So I really applaud the ongoing efforts that I see to document the crimes that are occurring, whether that's coming from civil society or from other places. Those efforts are so critical for analysts and then for policymakers to have the numbers and the real data to back up the interventions that they're pushing. So I would say that, and then I would lastly just reiterate that earlier point that international independent investigations are critical to resolving any crisis. And we've seen these in other mass atrocity crises around the world. They're critical to documenting and they're critical to recognizing and giving weight to what we hear from survivors in Cameroon and elsewhere. And so it's so important to support these efforts. It's something that we really support, and investigation efforts also prompt justice and accountability, which we know is critical to preventing the recurrence of crimes, because mass atrocities are likely to, or most often occur in places where atrocities have occurred in the past. So transitional justice efforts like these are critical to preventing recurrence. So that's how I would answer that question.
Kyra, I just want to ask you a question actually in terms of, I know, I believe the State Department did a fact-finding mission for the Rohingya, if I'm wrong, and I believe you guys were involved heavily. I'm wondering if you guys can also do the similar thing regarding the Anglophone regions in Cameroon. So we have data coming in, and maybe you can speak a bit about what you guys have done in the past for the Rohingya, and can you link it in for us?
Sure, that's a great question. Yeah, the State Department did, hire an external group to do an investigation into the Rohingya crisis, and those sorts of investigations are intended to help the State Department and the U.S. government make genocide determinations. And so, this is an ongoing conversation for those who are watching the Rohingya crisis, whether or not a genocide determination will be made. And as you may know, just a few weeks ago, there was a genocide determination made in the Uyghur crisis in China. So, as to our center, we don't conduct those investigations ourselves. We're a pretty small team that's kind of focused on spotlighting atrocity risk and really raising the profile of these conversations. And so we kind of applaud and support efforts to document and encourage, groups like the State Department and their partners to do these documentation efforts. As I mentioned, they're extremely critical.
Thank you. Thanks, Ifat, for that intervention. And thanks, Kyra, for your response. I think just to highlight the point which you made, in the sense that regardless of a crisis being termed a genocide or not, that should not be a precursor for people to carry on committing atrocities. So our hope is that the international community is not waiting for that terminology to be used before they take action, because regardless of that, people are dying every day. My next question will go to Dr. Fomunyo. While I'm sure you must have seen the tool which we launched on Wednesday, you were part of the team actually on Wednesday, where we are trying to record atrocities happening on the ground. And to Kyra's point, that's one of the ways which CDN is trying to help international organizations. But creating that database, putting a lot of information into it so that international organizations, other countries can have a look at what is going on in Cameroon. How do you see the US making use of such tools, making use of such data? How will that inform their policy with their international partners? I know you talked earlier a lot about what the US will do, but how do you see the US, bearing in mind what happened with the last administration and the international relationships, how do you see the US re-engaging with its international partners with the data it has on hand to be able to work to bring a swift ceasefire and a mediated settlement with where we are today?
Sure. To respond to that question, let me first also kind of really thank Kyra and the work that's been done by the U.S. Holocaust Museum that has now brought Cameroon into its portfolio. The fact that the US Holocaust Museum should have Cameroon on its list of alert countries by itself should be very telling to everybody. The fact that the Genocide Prevention Center is not preoccupied by what is happening in Cameroon, that by itself is a very strong statement that everyone should take note or notice of. So I really commend the work that's been done by the museum and by Kara and her colleagues. Let's not forget that for 2 years in a row, the Norwegian Refugees Commission has said this is the most underreported conflict in the world, 2 years in a row. And we can see that because the numbers, the numbers of casualties being reported hasn't changed. For close to 2 years now, every official report has talked about 3,000 deaths. Yet we know that people are being killed on a daily basis, and that just in 2021 alone, close to 50 people have already been killed because of this conflict. And yet every official report will say more than 3,000. I almost feel like our people are dying twice. They're dying when they're being killed, and they're dying when they're not acknowledged as victims of this crisis. And we have to put an end to that. The figures are underreported because the press cannot even have access. International human rights organizations cannot have access to the conflict zones. And we know there are people in the bushes, there are people the internally displaced persons living in forests, living in areas that don't have easy access. And so there's a lot of information that we're missing. And I think if the UN system is serious, and as we engage with various countries, let's put the need for this independent international investigation front and center. Because if the UN Human Rights Commission were to send out an international investigation, it would go right into some of those areas that have difficult access, and it would bring out the truth about this conflict, which is that even by some of the UN's own writings, close to between 3 or 4 million people are already being directly impacted. And if we know the interconnectivity amongst African families, then virtually you can extrapolate from that figure to say that there's no one person in that region that's not been impacted negatively one way or the other by this crisis. And that's why gathering information, gathering as much data as we can would be extremely helpful, because it would keep track of what's going on. It would inform those that are well-intentioned. It would give them something to work with. It would also provide material for justice and peace and reconciliation purposes. If people have got to be prosecuted, that is enough evidence to be able to back up the prosecutions. And then ultimately, at some point, if there's going to be a reconciliation process, we're going to have to start by reconciling ourselves with those that have lost their lives as a result of this crisis. You couldn't do that without having all of these ingredients. And independent information gathering is very useful. I'm really aware, and in fact, last year, participated in a number of initiatives where a database was launched that involved universities, launched in Canada, led by the University of Toronto, that involved a number of universities that were gathering data, analyzing data, and making sure that this data was properly documented and properly preserved. Can you imagine if somebody went to Garbu today and tried to gather information with everything that's happening in Garbu? You're probably not going to get it. But if we have a database that has already stored all of that information and classified it and categorized it properly, the day there will be prosecutions on Garbu, that information will become very vital. So this is a good initiative that's been launched by CDN. I know there are other initiatives out there, and a number of the groups that already exist have initiatives. Some of the media houses in Cameroon that are well endowed have already also been collecting their own data and their own information. The Human Rights Watch and other international organizations have their own databases. It would be very useful to harmonize actions so that we can build synergies and not be duplicative, but rather be complementary of each other. And my hope is that at some point, when we engage in a negotiated process for peace, that those that have run these data centers will have a room in which they can discuss how to make all of this information public and put it in the public space in a coordinated manner so that we ensure that each individual that's lost their life as a result of this conflict is been accounted for, and that all of the atrocities have been documented and reported, and that can lay the foundation for healing in the post-conflict period.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. I just want to jump in and continue with what Dr. Fromiu just said. I think in Cairo, I think when the State Department did a fact-finding mission for the Rohingya, I feel like if we could replicate the same thing for Anglophone Cameroon regions, I think it's going to be very great, like wonderful, because then you have a government have collected information, and that information can be shared across, I guess, with the European counterpartners and African counterpartners. So if we could, I mean, if JT is listening in, this is something that the State Department can definitely assist in collecting that data. And that's because we've been stuck with that 3,000 number for 4 years, and we all know that number is not accurate. We all know that, right? I mean, but having a government coming in and saying, let's collect all the data, let's hire these organizations or whoever they did to collect information, and having that small fact finding, and which they, you could also have a fact finding mission for Cameroon from the Human Rights Council, but having its own, it's going to be really helpful for a lot of international partners.
Yes, thank you, Ifad. And I think this data issue has been a very big problem. And one of the difficulties in collecting data is also looking at the relationship between those collecting the data and the communities being affected. And the coalition thought that the relationship, we can very much relate with those that have been affected. We can speak their dialect, we can speak with them in Pidgin, so they can feel comfortable to talk to us, and collecting this data will provide an opportunity to share with those experts that are not like Southern Cameroonians, and even with the State Department and other partners who may want to use this data. Professor Roberts, the Canadian Parliament holds a hearing on Tuesday, February 16th, to discuss the ongoing war in the Southern Cameroons. We've been talking much about the United Nations Human Rights Commission. What are your expectations from this hearing? Based on your experience, what steps can Canada take to ensure that the United Nations Human Rights Councils investigate the crimes committed, and to engage or reinforce a credible multilateral mediation process that gets Cameroon to the negotiation table?
Well, I wouldn't rely on Canada. That's what I would tell everybody. Unfortunately, I wouldn't rely on our parliament. I'm one of the few sort of Canadian scholars that have been focused on the Cameroon issue, and I came to it late. So I've only been really focused on it since about, the summer of 2018. Nobody from the Canadian government has ever reached out to me. No MP, no civil servant, not directly. And in fact, until this meeting, I didn't even know about this thing that was happening on February 16th. So I have to now go investigate to see which committee that is. I assume that's our Foreign Affairs Committee or something. I mean, Canada has a role. Canada is the only G7 country that has, sits in both the Commonwealth and the Francophonie, right? Those two organizations are mentioned in the resolution. So, I mean, Canada, has been part of the, United Nations since its founding. It is often very active across every specialized agency, the Human Rights Council, Commission. It's been active everywhere. But being active doesn't mean it's being strategic or it's being effective. It's being present. But is it being effective? Does it have a plan? And everything I've been able to tell over the last 2.5 years of focusing on this, looking at both our executive, which is the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's Office, Global Affairs Canada, and our MPs, who are the ones that, are the ones either in the government party or in the opposition party, they really don't know a lot about this. So it's been an education function for the last little while. So reaching out by this new administration across, not just at the executive level, but across functional areas, cooperation within the IMF, cooperation within the World Bank. You know, Canadians and Americans sit on these same tables, making these same decisions. That needs to be part of the process. And I think Canada needs a bit of, unfortunately, Canada could have been leading on this as a country that has to dealt with Anglophone, Francophone differences, an evolving, complicated federal system, you know, crises of nationalism. We've gone through all this. So Canada should be leading, and yet Canada tries to do as little as possible in order not to rock the boat. So one of the things I would hold out that the Americans do that we don't, which is a good thing, what the Americans do, is that as a Canadian, I couldn't find out how Canada's executive director was voting when the Cameroon, every 6 months, you have to have another tranche of money under an IMF program. I couldn't find out as a Canadian how Canada was voting. It was top secret. I could, as a Canadian, and I did this, phone the US Treasury Department and found out how the United States was voting at the IMF. That is, you know, in terms of the transparency there, that means that, you know, both politicians, Congress, which has the oversight capacity, but also individual American voters and the diaspora community, et cetera, can know exactly what the US administration is doing within the international financial institutions. Canada can't, we can't know. It's top secret. They won't talk to us. So we need, as Canadians, we need the United States to lead and nudge. And I think at that point, Canada does have a lot to offer because of our deep relationship with Cameroon that goes back to 1962, and the fact that we are a federal country that is in the Commonwealth and the Francophonie, two additional organizations which need to be also at this table. But Canada is not going to lead on this. Canada needs to be nudged. So that's all I'll say.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts, and thanks for your insights. And I appreciate your frustration on the part of your government. But hopefully, with some of the information you've gathered here today, it should be able to help you and give you some ammunition, as per se, to take back to your government. And thanks for always actually sticking your head out there for us. Thank you so much.
Can I just jump in on that point? I'm sorry to interject, but just
okay.
to say that a little bit of good news for my friend and namesake, Professor Chris Roberts, is that the Canadian Parliament is holding a hearing on Cameroon. This is probably a first. It's going to happen on the 16th of February at the Subcommittee on International Relations Organizations that has jurisdiction over Africa. For the first time, is going to hold hearings on Cameroon. So some of the work that Chris and others are doing in Canada, some of the advocacy work with their members, it's beginning to bear fruit. So we just have to keep the momentum going and make sure that policymakers get to pay attention to this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fomunyo.
I
just want, so if I come back to you, then maybe you add. The next question was actually for you, Ifat. So you can just add that to what you have to add. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I know you've talked a lot about the UN and the processes that are involved with trying to get either sanctions or a fact-finding mission and things like that. So we would really want to hear from you what those obstacles are specifically and how we can work either through them, around them, or work with them. So we would really like to hear from you those specific obstacles and how we can work around them.
Oh, before I forget what I was going to say, just to follow up with Professor Roberts, actually the role Canada can play is ask France. Our Prime Minister can call Macron and say, you know what, let's, France should come to the table. We do have a special relationship with France, right? and this is something that I think our government could be really helpful. But anyway, in terms of your other question, again, at the Human Rights Council, you have a lot of governments who are committing similar atrocities who may push back on this. So the United States can ask its counterpartners, or rather like France, the UK, Germany, Japan, Norway, I believe is also on the council. And weirdly enough, France campaigned on human rights issues that have been being committed in Cameroon to when they asked to be on the council, right? Because it's a voting process, and they were like, "Oh my God, we believe in freedom for journalists," and like some of us were looking back, it's like, is France okay? Like, what were they saying? Are they not actually implementing? So, the US can have these countries and ask to, because at the end of the day, what happens is basically you have a resolution and the countries vote on it. And this is the process moves forward. And Human Rights Council has the funding mechanism to start a fact-finding mission much faster than an UNGA one. So those things, again, it comes down to the State Department saying, we're going to do this. We're going to ask our colleagues and allies across the board. We're going to ask South Africa. We're going to ask Kenya. I'm not sure if Kenya's on the board, but those countries, and come together and say, we're going to do a fact-finding mission. I hope I answered that question. I know it sounds very simple, but it's actually quite complicated because you're asking governments. And something else that you could do, and hopefully, I will do as much as I can, actually to start going to the events in Geneva. I think Lawyers for Something Canada has been quite active in Geneva regarding Cameroon. So when you have civil societies participating in Geneva, other governments can hear about what's going on. So it's the same thing. The work that we do in New York would be carried out only in Geneva, and then civil societies are participating back and forth, bringing Cameroon to the table and asking for a fact-finding mission. And I say this because we've dealt with countries that are going through much, I don't want to say much more difficult, but various crises, and have managed to get things done. We just have to take the blueprint from what they've done and implement it. And I know for a fact that the US was quite heavily involved with the fact-finding mission for Myanmar, right? And then they can also ask actually the Security Council to assign an envoy, just particularly, and like they're taking presidency during March, something that they can bring up and say, we need for a certain period of time for a fact someone just an envoy on Cameroon. So the U.S. has a lot of power. U.S. does, it can influence other countries. We've seen that. And if they're very serious about addressing the crisis, there are many levels of engagement they can do. But I know it's easier said than done, but it all comes down to that diaspora community, and then institutions like USIP and Dr. Fominou's organization, and then you have the Holocaust Memorial Museum coming together, asking the US government to actually commit, not just say the international community, because I saw that on the resolution. I'm like, who is the UN? What international community? I'm like, oh, the Americans are talking about themselves then, in my opinion. So those things, you can break barriers. I mean, you see at the council that there's so much pushback, back and forth between countries. But I mean, they just had one on Libya. I mean, this is for me, it was a big deal, right? And these hearings at the council are so important. So if the United States is serious about addressing the crisis in Cameroon, they can definitely take this up at the council and ask their allies to vote in favor for a fact-finding mission. So it is possible. I'm sounding very optimistic today, but because we do have and we've been engaged with other governments, and been raising Cameroon with them also, and they are also sitting in Geneva too, not just in New York, and asking them to say, hey, could you please sponsor a resolution on for a fact-finding mission on Cameroon and pressuring. Yeah, and I think it will create pressure on the government because fact-finding missions, they always create that. It's almost like, you know, the UN is coming in for the truth, and some governments don't want that. And so, yeah.
Thank you, Ifat. Thank you, Ifat. I think the last question, we've seen a lot of interaction from Valentine Ghana, Ato Mucha, Dr. Maggie Kilo. Let that engagement continue, and the panelists at their convenience can answer some of the questions on the question and answer forum. Let me turn to you, Kyra. You heard Congresswoman Karim Bass mention the humanitarian issues that in Cameroon. And Dr. Fomiu saying that the Norwegian Refugee Council, 2 consecutive years have said the conflict is the most neglected. Thousands of Southern Cameroonians continue to flee persecution to the United States through very difficult situations, through Ecuador and Colombia and all of that. Over 400 villages have been burned down, as one of the questions in the forum did mention. Thousands of hundreds of health facilities and schools remain closed, and there is no sight for durable peace to return. How can the humanitarian issues be addressed, in your opinion? And do you support a temporary protection status for as an immediate interim solution for Southern Cameroonians fleeing violence to the United States?
Thanks, Henry. So regarding humanitarian issues, our position as the museum is that civilians will continue to suffer as long as the crisis continues. And so I think it's really incumbent, as you know, all of the panelists in this fantastic event have mentioned, for the government to take responsibility to address the root causes of the crisis, for both parties to come to the table, and for the international community to continue to use both carrots and sticks to support and pressure both sides of the conflict to do so. We are not a humanitarian organization, nor are we an advocacy organization, so I unfortunately might have to defer to some of my other panelists to answer the question about the US policy regarding immigration, because that's not our area of focus. But what I would say is that all tools, you know, by the US and by all other actors that are party to this conflict can and should be used to address the crisis, because it has been neglected for far too long. And so once again, this resolution, you know, doesn't compel any action necessarily, but it is a really strong roadmap for the US and for other foreign governments to use, and to look to these recommendations and see how they can implement them themselves. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Right, I think we've come to the end of our questions. I know, like Henry said, there are lots of questions in the forum, and what we are going to do is take those questions down, forward them to the various panelists, and hopefully we'll get some answers, and this will be uploaded on our website and possibly on Facebook. But thank you so much for all the interaction. Thank you for the questions asked. Henry, I don't know if you want to take at least a couple from the chat room. I know there was a question asking about if we cannot go through targeted sanctions, what other means can we use? If targeted sanctions are difficult to use, or we think they will not bear fruit. I don't know who in the panel can take that. I don't know. I'll start with Dr. Roberts.
I think targeted sanctions have to be part of the mix. They just have to be targeted to specific individuals. As we said, as everybody said, they could be travel related, which are pretty minor, especially under a COVID environment. But we know that how many people in the country travel to Europe or travel to North America, have, you know, second, third houses here, kids in school here, etc. So travel, economic sanctions, which of course both United States has been a leader in this, but Canada now has a specific regime. You know, it frustrates me again as a Canadian when Belarus had obviously flawed elections, Canada reacted so quickly with other countries to implement targeted economic sanctions against specific individuals of the Belarus regime. It was within, very quickly. We have known about the Cameroon crisis, problem, war, insurgency, etc., for a long time, and nothing in Canada. So there is a bit of a double standard there, which we won't get into. So targeted sanctions have to be part of it. There is no other way that I can see other than targeted sanctions being part of the process to get people to take this personally seriously, and actually start thinking about solutions that are good for many people, as opposed to solutions which are good for keeping certain people in power. All the other, what I've said about the IMF and the World Bank, et cetera, and all those, international, foreign direct investments, those are all important forms. But until there's targeted sanctions, including maybe the possibility of criminal persecution, the key actors are not going to change their behavior.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. Henry?
Yes, just one question, one last question from Valentine Ghana. He says, when the Yugoslavian crisis happened in 1995, the international community did not say leave it to Europe. America got heavily involved militarily, and the problem was solved. Same for South Africa's occupation of Namibia, which was not left to Africa. Why are you in this case saying we should leave it to the African Union? Dr. Fomu, can you go with that?
I agree with the premise of his question. And so I thought his question was directed towards IFAD, because I'm also one of those who in 2005, I wrote a piece that was published by Washington Times, in which I said the slogan African solutions to African problems it probably meant well, but it wasn't articulating what Africans want and what Africans need. But that on the contrary, it was going to provide an excuse for major powers to do nothing about African crises. And so we cannot allow for our crises to be relegated to a second zone or to the periphery just because they're occurring on the African continent. That said, the African Union is our continental body. We have to put pressure on the African Union to step up and play its role. And I think we should not be reluctant at doing that. But at the same time, reminding everyone else that issues that pertain to global security come within the purview of the United Nations Security Council as well.
Can I jump in to answer part of the
go
question?
ahead, please.
I don't think we're saying that we should just leave it to Africa. I think what we're saying that Africa should be a partner in addressing the crisis. And I've seen that we wish if the African Union or an African member would have sponsored the Rio Formula meeting, but you saw most of the members were Western countries. So we're not saying that. We're saying that Africa needs to be part of the solution. We're saying that African Union needs to come in and bring BIA to the table. That's what we're saying. We're not saying that we're going to lead this crisis to Africa, because that's unfair, right? Because you have a huge Cameroonian diaspora in the Western world. So, what about them? Like, are we going to leave them behind and say, we should just address concerns of the people who are just on the continent? It's not how it works. Our government doesn't work in that sense. If you have a Cameroonian Canadian and they go to their elected official and say, I need you to address this crisis because otherwise I'm not going to vote for you. It's going to make a difference, right? Because so in the United States, that was my interaction also. The Cameroonian diaspora played a huge role in addressing the crisis. Otherwise, the United States would have never led the thing for the ARIA formula, right? Because the U.S. Cameroonian Americans say you need to do something, and the advocacy we saw. So we're just saying that, you know, we need the African Union and the African member states to come in, and let's be realistic. African members are sitting on the Security Council. Their voices matter to a lot of member states who are not Western countries, right? Their voices matter to Asia. Their voices matter to Southern American countries, Latin American countries, right? We see that interaction a lot. The A3 will team up with Saint Grenadine on many issues, right? So that interaction is required. We're just saying that we need the African Union to assist us in addressing the crisis. That's it.
Thank you very much, Ifat. Thank you very much, Dr. Fomuyo, Professor Roberts, Kyra, for taking time off to share your thoughts and experiences with us. We very much appreciate your contributions and look forward to continuing the engagement with you all. Let me take the opportunity to thank our partners, friends in Africa, Latin America, the Middle East as well, Europe, for the constant insight and guidance in what we're doing, to see that justice and durable peace is given to the Southern Cameroons. We also want to take the opportunity to thank the MPs from Ireland, Estonia, India, Mexico, and other African countries who, because of their prior commitments, could not make it to this forum, but expressed the desire to watch the recorded version. We want to also thank Lord Boateng, Lord Alton, Honorable Emily Tombry, for being very vocal about the abuses perpetrated on our civilian population. We take the opportunity to extend our thanks also to Honorable Helen Hels of the UK Parliament for taking the time to listen to us, and we appeal to all UK MPs to support the early day motion 1430. The coalition has written to all UK MPs, and we want to immensely thank all those who have reached back to us and responded to our appeal. In closing, Judith, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Henry. Henry, before I close, I want to thank you for a wonderful moderation, and thank you for I know the efforts put in the background to get this going. So thank you so much on behalf of the coalition. I would like to thank all the panelists and participants. We have a team in the background working and doing a lot of work, but I really want to call out every panelist by thanking Representative Karen Bass, JT, Senator Beatrice, unfortunately, who could not be here, Honorable Darren Bergman, Honorable Sebastian Nadeau, Honorable Kaufman, Dr. Chris Fomunyo, Professor Roberts, Chris Roberts, Ms. Ifad, and Ms. Kyra. Really, we appreciate your time. We thank you for coming here to talk about our plight and educating us on how we can meander the international community and be able to bring peace to Cameroon and Southern Cameroons in particular. So thank you once more for coming, and thank you to all the participants and everybody who's dialed in. It's been a long, I think close to 4 hours or 3 hours. I think it's 4 hours actually, close to 4 hours with a very engaging discussion. We did not think it will go this long, but I think everybody has been engaged, and there are lots of questions. Like I said towards the end, we are actually taking down all those questions. We will endeavor to get them answered and posted. Some of you joined us on Wednesday when we launched the Human Rights Incident Reporting Tool. Please make sure, like Henry said before, that we are telling our story. Make sure that we are giving the information. Make sure that we are getting that number off the 3,000. You can go to www.reports@scatrocities.info. We have that posted on our website, posted on our Facebook, and posted on Twitter. So please make sure you share and report. We would like to also inform our members, like was said earlier, that there is a hearing of the subcommittee on Foreign Affairs of the Canadian Parliament on February 16th from 6:30 p.m. And I think Dr. Fominio will be on that panel. So please, if you can tune in, that's another avenue for us to talk, to listen to the international community and try to influence what is happening. We also have two other important events coming up, being put up by the Oxford University. Oxford University is putting up another two sessions to talk about Resolution 684. The first session is on February 17th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the second session is on February 19th, 11 a.m. as well. So please, if you can join in, please, and make sure that you have your contributions heard. They are also going to talk about Resolution 684 and how it affects the international community. In the coming days, please watch out for announcements from the coalition. We've got some big announcements to make about new membership, about our advisory board. So stay tuned and follow us. We will also have other webinars planned coming in the next few weeks and months in collaboration with other organizations and advocacy groups in the diaspora. With that being said, I would like to extend thanks from the advisory board, the steering committee, whom a lot of members are dialed on here as well, and our strategic partners. We would like to extend thanks to the US Senate and the House for listening to us, because it's not every time that you knock a door that you expect them to listen to you. But we really want to extend thanks to them, the Senate, the House, the State Department, and other departments within the US government, and also our international partners, like Henry said before. Thank you for listening to us and joining us in this quest for peace and taking some of the suggestions which we are putting on the table. We will not, it would be remiss of me not to talk about Kevin and team, Kevin Lampe and team in the background, who always help us to put this excellent event together. Thank you again, Kevin, and thanks to you and the team for all the work you're doing. I know you're busy doing what you do best. So thank you. And without much else to say, we look forward to welcoming you to our next webinars. Thank you so much for dialing in your numbers, and hope to speak to you soon. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.
It was great having you all. Thank you so much.
Professor Roberts, Kyra, Ifad, Honorable Nado. Thank you very much for joining.
Merci, Monsieur Nado. Thank you.